At this time, I'm so delighted to invite the speakers to the stage. They're here for our first session on awareness and the legislation Improving Mental Health Access for Students Act. The bill is Improving Mental Health Access for Students Act, HR 2802, and in the Senate, 1236. So this bill is in both chambers of Congress and it's bipartisan. So please join me in welcoming Monica Johnson, Director of the 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Sanvi Arora, Executive Director of the Youth Power Project. And our very own Joanna Rosen, our Manager of Federal Policy. So let me tell you a little bit about how fantastic Monica Johnson is. Monica Johnson has worked in the behavioral health field for over 26 years and most recently served as the interim commissioner for the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. Prior to this role, she served as the division director for the Division of Behavioral Health for 8 years, the Community Mental Health Director for 3 years, and the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Director for 1 year. I'm so pleased that Monica Johnson was able to take time from her busy schedule to join us here today and share her expertise. Next, sitting next to Monica, Sanvi Arora. I'm just in awe of Sanvi. Sanvi, just before I get to her bio, Sanvi contacted me, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, more longer than that. And I was just so impressed by her, and you will be as well. And she connected with me as I'm a board chair of the Mental Health Liaison Group, which is a national coalition of basically all the national mental health groups in town, from the psychiatrists, the psychologists, to NAMI, et cetera, and seeking to get involved. And now she's one of our newest members of the Mental Health Liaison Group and is just so remarkable in the work that she does, empowering youth and having that youth voice. So Sanvi is a public policy and computer science student at UC Berkeley, and the executive director of the Youth Power Project, a youth-led organization that empowers young people under 25 to inform local, state, and federal policy making based on their own experiences. She is focused on understanding the intersection between public policy. And lastly, we have moderating our session is Joanna Rosen, who joined the AFSP policy as manager of federal policy. And before I turn it over to Joanna, we're going to hear from U.S. Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska's 2nd District.
Hi, I'm Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska, and I thank you for allowing me to speak about suicide prevention and a bipartisan bill I'm a co-sponsor of, the Improving Mental Health Access for Students Act. Providing access and resources to all students at colleges and universities can be a major tool in reaching those who may be considering suicide or know someone who is. Sadly, suicide has touched my family. I'm the oldest of 9 children, and my youngest brother committed suicide by drug overdose. So I understand very well the importance of your organization. My bill would require those institutions that participate in federal student aid programs to share contact information for suicide prevention resources with students. If those colleges and universities have student IDs, they must list phone numbers for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Crisis Text Line, and a campus mental health center or program on those cards. If they don't have IDs, they must provide the information on their websites. This is just one way to try and reach as many students as we can who may be considering suicide. If you are someone who is willing to share your story and experience, you're also appreciated. Sharing your story is a way to personally reach someone and let them know they are not alone. While each situation is different, you can let them feel reassured you know that same winding path and that recovery is possible. If you are someone who is considering sharing your experience, I urge you to make sure you are at a safe place in your recovery. Be honest and practice what you will say, and make sure to include resources for those who need it. Again, thank you for allowing me to have a few minutes of your time. I hope this forum is productive and meaningful for you. Thank you.
Good morning. Y'all, listen. The devil is busy. I'm gonna take 2 minutes to tell y'all about what I had to go through to get here. I have been so excited about the opportunity to come here and to have this conversation with you all, and to thank you just for your tireless efforts around advocacy and support in this space. So I flew out of Atlanta to get here yesterday. Weather's great. Everything is all good. I'm like, this is gonna be smooth sailing. My first flight was delayed 3 times. After the 3rd time, I said, is there another flight? They said, yes, there is. It's only about a 15-minute difference than the flight you're on, but it looks like it's gonna get delayed, so you might as well change. So I changed flights. I get on the next flight. I've been at the airport at this point about 6 hours. No big deal. Atlanta has a lot of great restaurants, so it was all good. That's what I told myself, coping mechanisms. Y'all, I get to this second plane that they send me to, which is now the 6th gate. If you're not familiar with the Atlanta airport, that can mean several plane ride stops. Get to the gate, they said, sorry, it's delayed. We're waiting on our crew. I said, okay. All right, the crew shows up. I knew the message was gonna be bad when the pilot came out to say, listen, folks, the air conditioner basically is not working. He said something fancier, but he said it's about 90 degrees on the plane. We're gonna see if we can fix that. So we'll be delayed. So about 30 minutes later, pilot came back. They couldn't make the agents do this. The pilot came out and said, so this plane is not going anywhere. We have another plane. I'm like, magically? There's just one waiting like a taxi? What do I know? So we get on the next plane, which of course there's a delay because it wasn't expecting to go anywhere, apparently. We get on the plane, we're all happy, finally. It's about, 10 o'clock at this point, p.m. I started at 3 o'clock. So I'm like, finally. I've met people. I'm not told so many people about 988 in the airport. I wish any part of this story I was making up, but I'm not. We get on this plane. We are boarded. The doors close. It is all good. Everybody's like, finally. The pilot comes on, and he says, I don't really know how to tell y'all this. At this point, I have a little tear in the corner of my eye. And I'm like, is this a sign? Is something bad gonna happen in the air? Should I just not go? So he says, we're gonna have to deboard. There is a noise curfew coming into Reagan Airport here in DC. And this plane is too old and it's going to make loud noise.
What?
And we will be landing past the curfew. So in my soul, I said, okay. Y'all didn't know this before y'all put us on this plane. You didn't know about the curfew, but okay, all right, okay. So we get off, they said there's gonna be another plane we're gonna get on. There is, it's delayed, but we get on it. I don't know, it's about 11:30 at this point. I don't know if I'm coming or going. My husband is like, I just think you should just come back. This doesn't feel good. I said, I'm going, I am going. I don't care how, but I am getting here. Get on the plane, the pilot says, thank you. I needed that group hug, thank you. We get on the plane and the pilot says, it's all good, we're gonna be good, we understand what y'all have been through, and this plane is just 3 months old. Don't tell us that. Don't tell me that. We won't have to worry about the noise ordinance, we're gonna be good. It was all good. I got here. I was a little out of sorts by the time I got here to my hotel, which was maybe about, 3 o'clock, 2:30, whatever time it ended up being. So I looked at my notes for today. I thought that the hotel that I was staying in was where the event was. I woke up super early. I was operating off of 3 hours of sleep. And I got up and I don't see signs anywhere. I was like, there's no signage here. So I called the folks here and say, I can't find y'all. It's like, I'll meet you at the elevator. And then they're like, standing at the elevator, there's nobody coming. Just like, where are you? Where are you? Y'all, I'm at the wrong hotel. I had to call an Uber to get here. If you saw me flying in at the last minute, that's what happened. So when I tell you that I am happy to be here, and whatever is supposed to come out of this, I hope comes out of it, because this was destined to be. So again, I'm Monica Johnson. I am in need of some support right now, and I appreciate the love. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the 988 director for the SAMHSA administration. I want to tell you a little bit about what 988 is and how transformational I think that this work is. And I don't just say that in jest. I'll give you a quick high-level overview and then talk about really getting the word out. I did my part yesterday, but and literally I do it everywhere. I'll give y'all one more antidote because I'm on a roll now. I had outpatient surgery a couple of months back. I had to be put to sleep, simple procedure, had to be put to sleep. I woke up, or they woke me up, and they started asking me questions, to make sure I'm awake and I'm good. And I look around, I don't know, it's about 7, 8 medical people in the room, and they said, "Are you okay?" And I swear to God, y'all, I said, "Do y'all know what 988 is?" This thing is taking over my life. The nurse said, "Did she mean 911? Is she asking for help?" I said, "No, I said what I said. I meant 988. So hopefully you won't have that level maybe of commitment to this, but you will be able to share the word about 988. So those of you that aren't familiar with SAMHSA, we are the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Our mission is basically to lead public health efforts to advance the behavioral health of the nation and to improve the lives of individuals living with mental or substance misuse disorders and their families. You can see our mission and vision statement there. SAMHSA is anchored right now around these primary priorities. The one that I'm gonna focus in on today, which specifically speaks to the topic of 988 in crisis care, is enhancing access to suicide prevention and mental health services. Our role at SAMHSA, our office is new. So our office is embedded within SAMHSA. So we sit along the Centers for Mental Health Services, substance misuse treatment, prevention, recovery, all the things, equity throughout the department. But our office was codified to exist in law, and we are responsible for managing the implementation of 988 at a federal level. We do that by working very closely with states, territories, tribal nations, and communities across the country. This is a partnership. It is a federal program that requires local partnership and local support. And so our main function as an entity is we provide grants, right? So we help provide those dollars. We help to provide technical assistance, support, and training. When I took this job, they talked to me about, of course, the line. I was familiar with the work. I was in a leading position of implementing 988 in Georgia, so on that side of it. And I remember thinking, this is really great, but we're about to do that right now? We just came out of a pandemic. We have workforce challenges. This is a mighty big goal, but we were excited about it. And we will be 2 years old on July 16th. That is amazing. And so There is great cause to celebrate, and there's also a ton of work that needs to be done, particularly in the space of awareness. But when I first took this job, I knew what 988 was, and they were like, but it's a second part to it. We also want you all to be able to transform how we do behavioral health crisis care in the country. Oh, okay. Do I have staff? Is there gonna be people? Is it just me? But it's a small, mighty team. We're about 24 people right now, aiming for more. And we work with, we administer a cooperative agreement with Vibrant Emotional Health. Texas is our lifeline administrator. So it takes a lot of people and a lot of effort to get this work done. So we're small, but we are definitely mighty. And so what 988 has done has been a catalyst. I have literally worked in this field for 27 years. I started out in like a tech in a psychiatric children's residential facility. I've done all the things in the space of this field. And so I feel very confident saying, this is the catalyst for change. This is the moment. We've been begging for a seat at the table in terms of just our profession in behavioral health for so long. We finally have that seat. We have support. We have advocacy, and we need to continue to not let this moment miss us or pass us by. I don't think I'm gonna see this happen, this level of work, this level of commitment, this level of passion, and the funding to back it up again in my lifetime at least. I just turned 50. I know I don't look 50, but I promise I did. And I'm positive that I won't be around to see the end result of this work, but I know that we are building foundational pieces that our children's grandchildren, great-grandchildren will be in a system where there won't be the level of stigma that is associated with this work, and will be able to know this like they know what 911 is. That is my long-term vision. So what is 988? It is a 3-digit number that transitioned from the previous 10-digit national suicide prevention number. It is meant to be an easy way for everybody, no matter who you are, no matter where you live in this country, that you are able to call, chat, text 988. 988 is for individuals that are thinking about suicide, that are experiencing any mental health crisis. It can range from I feel anxious, I feel isolated, to I feel depressed, to all the things. I have concerns about substance misuse, etc. So that was a big change that happened once the 10-digit number transitioned. So again, this can be done via call, via text, and via chat. It is available for use in anyone in the United States. So typically what happens is, y'all just heard my story, I just came out of Georgia. If I had a heart attack or a stroke, which was feeling kind of like, might have happened yesterday, and I was in Georgia, I know what to do. Somebody would have called what?
911.
911. And if I came here and the same thing happened, who would you have called?
911.
Well, so if I was seriously was having a mental health crisis and I needed support, what we now envision is that no matter where you are, you will know, well, I could call 988 if I didn't know what else to do in the same vein, right? So we want to make sure that people are aware of the number so that they can use it. You should receive the same level of support regardless of where you live. So that is our goal. We have specialty services that are available for veterans through a partnership we have with the VCL, for Spanish speakers, LGBTQI youth, and young adults, and those that are deaf and hard of hearing that prefer ASL as their mode of communication. The stats are here of this is the why we needed it. You see the numbers. This has been consistent. This happened before COVID. We continue because this came out in like 2021. But this is before COVID. We knew we had a crisis in our behavioral health system, and the opioid pandemic, by the way, did not just go away either. So we're still experiencing a lot of things that were in place prior to the pandemic and still are now. So the need was clear. This has been one of the bipartisan supported initiatives that I've ever seen in this space. The fun fact about this slide is all you need to really pay attention to is the bars. What I can tell you is that in FY 2007, basically there was not any money to support this work. There already existed over 200 crisis contact centers across the nation. Look how much money we were giving them, and look how much support. They were knocking it out the park. Look how much money now. Look at the change in investment from FY 22 to FY 24. 24. So when I say catalyst, moment in time, there is evidence to support that. We don't see this level of support, and I don't know how long we'll see that level of support. This administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has really, really made this be a priority area, so we have to take advantage of this. You all are going to get these slides, and in the effort of time, I'm going to go a little bit faster. But one of the things I do want to point out is, as of right now, roughly, we've had about a little over 9.5 million contacts since the launch. That is a lot of people without there being a national paid campaign like a Stop Smoking campaign, or think of all the big campaigns that have taken place. We've not been able to do that level of campaigning yet, but this is what's been done through states' collaboration and with our support as well. That is, a lot of people, but we know there's a lot of people that could still use this that don't know. So the awareness, again, is important. The other thing that I think is critical to know is that we have, you can look this up, there's over 50% of the states that exist right now that have implemented some type of support or law for 988, whether it's an appropriation, whether it's a study commission, whether it's a fee, like a 911 fee. So the work is there and being implemented. So what you are hearing throughout the day is that 988, the contact, calling the number, is just one thing. You have to have a response to that. So we're working on building and helping supporting mobile crisis teams across the country. Then there has to be a safe place to receive help and support when that is needed. It is an ecosystem that is important for all of the entities in the community to work together. This is a snapshot of legislation. I pulled this from NAMI's Reimagine Crisis site. They keep up with the legislation happening across the country. Not ever has that much legislation happened related to this. So again, awareness is important. You'll have these, you'll get this information to give you some more detail about how the line works, what happens, so you can better prepare people what to expect if they do use 988. All of that is laid out there for you. Equity is important to us. We want everybody to have equal access to these services, no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter a list of other things as well. We're working on a lot of important things this year, geo-routing being the first, to better make sure you're being connected to crisis centers that are in your community for improved coordination of care. So I am going to wrap up because they've told me I'm done like 10 times. But I want to get to some printables. There's a partner toolkit that we have. You can just put in your 988 partner toolkit and this will come up. It's a lot of free downloadable things that you can use, reprint, etc. FAQs, videos, social media content, etc. It's pretty dope, so please try to do that. And then there's a QR code. We do this now for everything. So if you can get that QR code, you can get on our newsletter email list, and that way you can stay in the know of what's happening with 988. Thank you and the angels above for allowing me to be here and for listening, and thank you for the extended time.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for such there we go. Thank you so much for such a lovely overview of 988. Hi, everyone. My name is Sanvi. I'm currently a sophomore at UC Berkeley. I'm studying computer science and public policy. And when I come up and do presentations, my favorite thing to do is do a hot take. But I can't think of what for some reason I can't remember my usual hot take. So I guess a fun fact about me is I love rainbow sprinkles. And yesterday I went to get ice cream with one of my friends because I landed. I've also been traveling and have been having interesting experiences with planes recently, which has just been interesting. But I landed and I got free ice cream, so I'm really excited. I went to the ice cream shop and they were like, "You don't have to pay. We're trying to get rid of it." And I was like, no way. So that's my rose of the week. I'm so happy now. I'm smiling, not because of you, because of the ice cream. I'm kidding. But I'm really excited to talk about the role of schools in reshaping adolescent perception and trust within the mental health care system. I think 988 and programs like 988 are really, really important, but I really want to talk about how to reach young people and what kinds of institutional supports are helpful in bringing more awareness and visibility. And also why, as we've destigmatized adolescent mental health, and particularly amongst young people, destigmatized topics overall covering mental health, why perhaps utilization rates continue to kind of steadily improve, and what we can do to actually leverage some of these principles when we're talking about youth outreach and trust in bringing more young people to these programs. And finally, I'm going to touch a little bit upon the importance of co-creation with young people in local and behavioral health contexts, local and state behavioral health contexts. It's really important to me that young people are involved in the crafting of policies and the crafting of rollout for campaigns, especially in the context of health and well-being. So, yeah. To get started, I'm going to talk a little bit about YPP, which is an organization that started a couple of years ago. It's focused on bringing more young people into the policymaking process and demystifying policy spaces for young people. A little bit kind of about us. When I was kind of in high school, I faced a couple of losses in my life due to mental health. And I think I didn't really have the opportunity growing up to really talk about mental health at home. The first place that I actually learned about mental health was at school, in high school. And during the pandemic, obviously, we did a lot in terms of overall talking a little bit more about mental health and getting more young people comfortable with that idea. But I saw one of my peers, one of my friends, who was actually talking about their mental health struggles in their community, and hearing them talk about it helped me realize what I was going through too. And the same peer actually, they wrote a bill in California. It was the Mental Health Day bill, SB 14. It's a bill that created mental health excused absences in the state, and it was informed by their own experience, and they were 15 too. And they were able to just take their idea, they wrote the bill on a Google document, and they turned it into law. And that was so cool to me. I was like, whoa, somebody my age could just have an idea and turn that into something beyond themselves. And that was so cool. So that's kind of where YPP originated. The organization aims to break down barriers between lawmakers and young people by centering the stories and voices of young people in local, state, and federal policymaking. And through our approach, we've seen a unique appetite for youth engagement. Young people have the interest and level of involvement, especially when we're talking about leaning into their own stories and experiences. But with regards to follow through and creating opportunities for them to be engaged, there seems to be a little bit of a gap that we're really excited is now closing. And I know so many young people in this room who are, I'm just recognizing young faces here who I know have been so instrumental in shaping local, state, and behavioral health programs. So I'm really excited to just be in community with you all. Yeah, so our strategy at YPP kind of involves a few different things. One of the biggest things is that we directly inform legislation, so we provide young people with the tools to turn their experiences into law. We walk them through the start to finish approach when it comes to actually drafting bills. We hop on Zoom calls, a lot of us. We're a small and mighty team. We have around 40 of us now across 7 or 8 different states, and we kind of sit down together and really actually draft the legislation from start to finish at the state and federal level. We also do a lot of survey work. We work on listening sessions with young people. We utilize educational institutions and partners that regularly engage young people to host listening sessions and craft informed policies that are, informed by lived experiences, but also representative of diverse and intersecting communities. Next, we do a lot of coalition building. We really leverage our intergenerational partners, and we're really thankful to AFSP for always being there for us as an organization. So big shout out, great. It's always been so great learning from everybody here. It's not our idea to reinvent the wheel, but rather bring that wheel to young people. And finally, we do a lot of work informing the public narrative. How do we center lived experience and storytelling in some of the outreach and narrative work that we do around policies and around program outreach? So a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about is the importance of school-based mental health. And what does school-based mental health really mean? Obviously, school-based programs are fundamental to improving young people's mental health literacy, resiliency, and comfort in seeking help. When you know that your educational institution or the people that you regularly see, especially given that education is one of the most stable institutions that universally students and young people do access most of the time, it can really mean a lot and move the needle in terms of making sure young people feel empowered in understanding and also taking action upon understanding their own mental health concerns. But when we talk about the rollout of school-based mental health programs recently, we know that many initial programs from schools were built to be temporary sources of support for quote-unquote milder issues, just to outsource students upon, recognizing that whatever needs they had might not necessarily be contained within like the academic purview of that educational institution, right? But we know that student demographics needs are changing such that more long-term, diversely experience-driven and culturally competent support services are needed to help students with intersectional backgrounds. And this extends beyond or across the entire continuum of care, from early intervention, awareness, to follow-through support and long-term recovery. So that being said, beyond schools, we know that we've seen significant changes in how young people attitudinally approach mental health. They perceive and respond to mental health challenges. We've destigmatized discussions regarding mental illness, especially within the context of emergency response and interventions. Like, young people feel a lot more empowered to, recognize when a peer of theirs is in need or they might be in immediate need for support. And through programs like 988, young people know that there are tools at their disposal, readily at their disposal for them to intervene if they need it. So crisis services like 988, especially over the last couple of years, have been transformative in handing young people the ability to seek emergency support upon recognizing that they're in need. And I think one thing that has been incredibly exciting is that schools have really taken it upon themselves to ensure that students are aware of these broader national services and services like 988. I know, for example, California, I'm from California, so I'm going to talk about California a little bit, but California has rolled out having hotlines available on all K through 12 and now collegiate student ID cards, which has been obviously incredible. Mental health days was another thing. When you see that an educational institution cares about your mental health and well-being and is willing to offer support and create that infrastructure, it can really mean a lot to you, especially if that's the only place where you might otherwise receive that support. Then, despite increased awareness, conversations, and infrastructure, why are we facing certain utilization gaps, especially among specific demographics of students? There's a couple of pieces of hesitation when it comes, at least this is what we've heard at YPP and kind of what we've had in conversation with students, when it comes to utilizing crisis services like 988. I think there's like an overall, one of the things, this is a really interesting figure on this slide, but I don't have Canva Premium, so this is what I got. But here are just a couple of the questions that sometimes we hear amongst students and amongst our peers. One of them is, I need support near me, but I'll probably receive support from someone far away who won't be able to help me. That's why it's really important for us to look at geo-routing and ensure that, we're not just utilizing or informing who we're connecting a student to or a young person or a caller to based on their area code, but actually based on where they're calling from. Another one is the person who answers won't understand my specific situation. This could be due to particular, a lot of the time students don't feel comfortable explaining, or young people might not feel comfortable explaining what they're going through because they might feel like it might be used against them. A lot of the times, also when it comes to 988 and also 911, it's along a similar vein. A lot of the times the intersection between criminal justice and mental health support plays a big role in terms of students might feel uncomfortable reaching out to programs like 988 because they might feel like if they share something, it might be used against them in court, or they might be forced to open up a legal case. Similarly, in like educational institutions, why a lot of the times reporting mechanisms like Title IX aren't as utilized by students is because they're afraid that if they share a specific factor of their situation or circumstances, that they might be put in a situation they might not know how to control. Next is, I don't think I'm facing enough of an emergency to make a call. I think a lot of the times young people put their mental health on a back burner. And while we are aware of mental health challenges that we might be facing, we oftentimes, due to being in survival mode, trying to balance, having a job, taking care of ourselves, going to school, it's really easy to be like, I just have to get it through today. I'm not in enough of an emergency to call or to reach out for support. These are just a couple of, obviously doesn't capture all of the hesitation, but these are just a couple of sentiments that we've heard amongst peers with regards to crisis lines, whether that be 988 or even local lines, online, remote, and anonymous lines as well. So when we talk about institutions, I think it's really important to tie some of this hesitation with a lack of trust between young people and administrators. This goes for both educational institutions and government institutions, and also civic institutions in general. A lot of the times government, healthcare, and education institutions seem both physically and metaphorically far away. A lot of the times young people, especially when we're talking about needing parental consent if you're under 18 for a certain medical intervention, or even despite that, if you're trying to advocate for yourself in a policy context, the government is literally far away from you. A lot of the times opportunities for engagement are unclear and intimidating, and a lot of the times young people aren't sure what the process looks like, so they're super intimidated by the idea of reaching out to those institutions for support. And I think in the context of mental health, one thing that I remember having this conversation, because we had a town hall at my high school during the pandemic to talk about mental health, where admin kind of got a cohort of students together to ask about, what would be helpful from a school in terms of talking about this more. And I think a lot of the biggest sentiment that was shared in that conversation was that a lot of the times, lack of communication around current events harms trust. At UC Berkeley this year, we faced quite a few losses due to suicide in our community. And when the university turns a blind eye to that or is silent about that and is just like, let's move on and let's not talk about it, that instills an attitude amongst students that, hey, one, their university doesn't want to hear about their concerns when it comes to mental health. Two, their university doesn't want to talk about mental health. Mental health does not spill over into your educational, academic, or even just your entire life. And it creates an attitude among students that, hey, they don't feel inclined to reach out to these institutions for support because it's like their institutions aren't coming to them to offer that support when these issues are brought to the limelight. Second, I think it's really important to understand that when you are in need, a lot of the times you don't turn to these institutions, you don't turn to healthcare, you don't turn to education, you don't turn to government for support, you turn to your community, you turn to your family, you turn to your peers. And I think that's something that we can tap into when it comes to creating further trust in these institutions. How do we leverage peer-based distribution? How do we leverage outreach that effectively leverages what students are already turning towards when it comes to discussing programs? That being said, there are limited bidirectional feedback streams between providers and young people receiving care. I think one thing that we were talking about within the UC system is, okay, how do we get young people to actually provide feedback back to the provider after seeking care? How do we get young people, when they call our peer-based crisis line, to provide feedback to the crisis line on what gaps they face and what went well, right? That's really, really important. Younger populations tend to be precluded from directly informing providers on effective care and response and intervention practices. And this has been proliferated by, one, historical distrust between impacted populations and healthcare institutions, two, broader informational asymmetries between young people and service providers in what services are offered and how they operate. One thing that YPP has been working on is we've been trying to survey college students across the country to see, and also survey at the same time institutions, healthcare institutions at these universities to see, okay, what programs tend to be most visible to students versus what aren't, And oftentimes it is these peer-based services from what we've seen. This is just conversation. We haven't done the formal research yet, but from conversation, oftentimes peer-based services are the ones that students turn to the most and are most visible to them. Whereas the ones that seem a little bit more detached and far away are often the most intimidating for students to reach out to. And finally, limited or inconsistent engagement of young people in program design and awareness to ensure that these impacted groups are consulted. These are just a couple of factors when it comes to co-creation with youth. But that being said, I want to shift a little bit to talk a little bit about how to turn this around. I know this is a little bit negative. I hope it didn't come off that way. But I want to talk a little bit about cultivating trust through youth empowerment within program reach and design. Let's talk about the power of the word peer. We talk about peer in clinically, right? But I think we can also talk about co-creation with young people and leveraging peer in an outreach and narrative context as well. So what does youth empowerment actually look like in rollout? First, I'm going to talk a little bit about effective inclusion. I think there's 3 main principles to effective youth inclusion in program design and outreach. The first is that it's holistic. Young people are included from start to finish. A lot of the times, young people are included to sign off on something. They're like, hey, here's an outreach proposal for this program, or here's something that our admin has thought of. Can we get the student body's signature on this? Holistic means that young people are involved in the creation from start to finish, especially if they're the ones utilizing the program. Second, it's intentional. There's a pathway to actually incorporate input provided by younger users in the final outcome. And finally, it's sustainable. You need to be ready to receive that engagement. Second, legitimate representation. You have to recognize that, oftentimes young people do have expertise on their own needs. They have subject matter expertise through their lived experience, and consulting that can be incredibly insightful. I'm just going to skip this real quick. So in terms of incorporating youth voices within program outreach and design, I think it's really important to include stories, include sharing of lived experiences. When we're talking about peer distribution, if you can work with young people to provide a face, another young face, or a peer face, someone that looks like them, to talk about these programs, that can be incredibly beneficial in cultivating greater trust. When in a world overwhelmed with noise, young people are much more likely to turn to somebody who looks like them or who they feel they can relate to. And I think that's something that can be really powerful. Second, creating those bidirectional feedback channels between youth and policymakers. And third, intentional outreach, education, and engagement. Schools play such a pivotal role in how young people perceive and understand their mental health, especially in a broader context. It's really important that we don't view mental health in a silo. Mental health, it spills over, it impacts every aspect of your life. It's part of your humanity. You can coexist with a mental health condition, you can succeed with a mental health condition. And oftentimes, young people don't understand that and feel through their institution or through other concerns that they're never going to be able to seek help and that this help isn't out there for them. That being said, I think we can redefine reach, pay attention to relatability and visibility, leverage entities that students trust, that includes clubs, faith-based groups, affinity and identity groups, and spaces to distribute content from a bottoms-up approach rather than top-down. I know a lot of us are organizers. It's really similar with outreach programs as well. How can we leverage on the ground people who students are already turning to? Build habits within existing habits. The messenger matters. In a world where common platforms are overwhelmed with noise, you're more likely to interact with somebody who you can relate to. And finally, build enthusiasm. You should champion the principle that lived experience is a needed and valid qualification. Age does not determine your stakeholdership or how much you're impacted by a specific policy or program. It's really important to remain responsive, to champion that institutions and policymakers and educators are responding to young people's needs and are proactive about responding and explaining current events, especially in the context of harm reduction. Creating trust is like the first step, oftentimes to even getting to a place where, you might perceive that you might need support, but how do you actually trust that those institutions that are offering that support can actually follow through on that and support you? So to conclude, schools are the primary distribution site for local programs and broader services like 988, but distribution on campus should consult students in its outreach and designing any of these services in the context of their locality. While education does create awareness, trust creates the comfort to respond. And thank you all so much for having me, and I'm really excited for the rest of the session.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. All right. I'm just going to try to adjust this mic a little bit. All right. Well, I feel so lucky to be part of this panel and to have organized this panel. Can we just give another round of applause to Monica for making it here against all odds? And to Sanvi for giving us such a great perspective and such great information and a way to sort of frame how we're going to continue this session. I feel like this is fantastic because we got the setup for what 988 is, and we got a little bit about a specific population that is particularly impacted by mental health and suicide right now. And where I'm going to I have the fun task of trying to combine those and give you a very, very, very quick, I'm going to try to be super quick with this because I know we're running a little behind. I am tasked with combining those two things and giving you a call to action for you to bring to your members of Congress tomorrow. So we're going to be talking about the Improving Mental Health Access for Students Act, which is HR 2802 and S1236. This is a bipartisan bill with support from both major parties in the House and the Senate. In the Senate, it is sponsored by Senator John Kennedy and Senator Cory Booker. It's currently before the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pension. We call it the HELP Committee for short, very easy to remember. And those of you who have senators in this committee, you're definitely going to want to highlight this for them. In the House, it is sponsored by Representative Lou Correa and Representative Don Bacon, who we heard from. And this bill is in the Committee on Education and the Workforce. So, what does this bill do? We heard a little bit about how some colleges maybe don't always respond when there are mental health needs in their communities, in their student bodies. So you'll see I have a little bit of a preview on the screen. If anyone was outside in the hallway taking pictures with our little props, Claire Ellis, the birthday girl, did organize and format all of these signs to have a little 988 student ID. And that is pretty much what this bill does. This bill puts 988 on student IDs for colleges and universities. So this bill is the same in the House and the Senate, does the same exact thing, same exact language, which is something that, if you're asked, something to help remember, but you'll have all this information in a one-pager, so that should be in your folders. This bill, with the intent of raising awareness and improving accessibility for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for college and university students, makes sure that any college that receives federal student, or that is part of a federal student aid program, which means that those schools offer their students the chance to receive federal student loans, includes contact information for 988, crisis text line, and any other campus mental health centers on their student ID cards or on their websites. Now, how many of us, the entire span of our lives have had to have a student ID at some point, whether that's college, high school, middle school. Many of us have had to have those student ID cards. This is a really great way to raise awareness and also combat stigma. Because again, if we're ignoring, the issue, if we're not talking about these things, if we're not making them aware, students are going to feel neglected, they're going to feel like they don't have a voice, they're going to feel like they don't have somewhere to turn. And making sure that students know about 988 is really, really important. Just as an anecdote, I was speaking to a group of high school students from across the country a couple months ago, and I asked, I think there were about 30 of them, I asked, does anyone know what 988 is? And no one raised their hands. So making sure that students are aware is really, really, really important, because if they don't know that 988 exists, how are they going to know to reach out? So making sure that this is printed on student IDs or on websites is really important. Now, this bill was introduced last Congress. It was introduced in the 116th Congress as well. Unfortunately, it has not passed the House before, but it did pass the Senate in the 116th and the 117th. There are a lot of reasons that a bill might not pass. It really depends on the political climate. It depends on prioritization of senators and representatives' bills. But right now, momentum and broad bipartisan support are really, really critical for moving a bill forward. And these are two things that will really push that bill through this process and get it made into law. And that is why you are all here. So this bill is really important right now because, like I said, it raises that awareness by making people aware. It's a positive tool to reduce these rates of suicide that we're seeing across college-aged individuals. It makes it easier for students to remember the 988 number just off the bat. If you're swiping your student ID for meals at your dining halls, or if you're trying to get into buildings and you need to swipe it, it's really, it's just always there. So it makes it more commonplace. It makes it very easy to remember. And it really normalizes seeking help by just destigmatizing the subject in general, because it's just every day, it's on your card. You'll see it, pretty much any time you need to swipe that card. So several states have already started implementing laws to make this happen on the state level individually. This also creates perfect momentum for us when we go to the Hill tomorrow and ask our representatives and our senators to sponsor this bill. Because, if the states are doing it, there's already support, we can point to them, and it gives us a really great point to move from and build momentum from. In your folders on the back of your one-pagers for this bill, you'll see a map that shows the states that have passed legislation to require colleges and universities to include 988 contact information on their student IDs. I believe in Soapbox 2, we have a list of states that do the same for K through 12, but right now for this specific bill, we're focusing on colleges and universities. We do hope to have a bill introduced down the line that will do the same thing for K through 12, but right now we're just focusing on colleges and universities. So while this bill is pretty straightforward, pretty much just put 988 crisis text line and another campus mental health resource on your student IDs or on your websites if you don't issue student IDs. While this is pretty straightforward, we've seen a little opposition in the past. Last session, we did see some opposition regarding whether or not that mandate to put this information on student IDs is a little bit too burdensome, whether or not this is too difficult for schools to deal with. We have some responses to those. You know, right now the bill allows flexibility. So if a school or a college or university doesn't issue student IDs physically, they are required to post this information on their website, which pretty much does the same thing, I think, especially in today's world where we're all sort of online all the time. If you're opening your school website, if you're opening your school portal to submit an assignment, you'll see that 988 number. You'll see that crisis text line number. You'll see that campus mental health resource contact information. So it's doing the same thing. It's raising that awareness, and it's making us a little bit more cognizant and aware of just who to reach out to when we need help. Another concern that we've heard is whether or not this is going to cost money. In a difficult political climate, when it's a little bit hard to get funding passed, which I'm sure you'll hear about later throughout the day, it can be tricky to get senators, to get representatives to sponsor bills if they have a really high authorization number or if they have an authorization at all. And that just means that there's a funding number attached to that bill that would finance the bill's enactment. So that's why this sort of feels like a timely bill to me, because it's essentially free. I mean, not really fully free, but it doesn't cost the federal government anything to require that this bill be enacted. And it will cost schools relatively little or nothing at all in order to print extra text onto student IDs that they're already printing, or to add text to their websites. So that's usually not, if it is a cost, it's not usually significant, and most of the time it won't cost much. So it's nice to be able to sort of offer members of Congress a very low cost, very effective means of raising awareness. Okay, so I just threw some information at you. Let's take a quick moment, recap those notes. I know I have a little bit of time left, so I just want to be aware of that. You have one-pagers in your folders that will give you quick talking points, but in your meetings with your congressional offices, you'll really want to focus on why this bill is needed and what you're asking of the congressperson. So we know that college-age students are at increased risk for suicide. In 2021, it was the second leading cause of death in the US and globally, actually, for college-aged individuals. While 988 can be a really great tool in lowering these rates and making sure that people have a place to go when they are in crisis, unfortunately, like we've talked about, not a lot of people are aware of that right now. And we need to do everything we can to sort of raise the alarm, get people talking about 988, just like Monica was doing in the airport under anesthesia. This is important. Making sure that we're talking about 988 is really important. So being able to have a physical ID that has that number, that has crisis text line, that has a campus resource, a campus mental health resource, written on it is going to be really, really, really helpful. And that's why it's necessary to make sure that we pass this bill to include that information. So our ask for members of Congress is pretty simple, pretty easy. Just support and consider co-sponsoring these bills. This bill, the Improving Mental Health Access for Students Act, which is HR 2802 in the House and S1236 in the Senate. If your member already supports this bill, you can thank them for that. There are a few co-sponsors already, but I think it's a great opportunity for us to really gain a lot of momentum. Like I said, it's a light lift, not as much funding attached to it, no funding level attached to it, and relatively easy to implement and get colleges on board with. So I think I'm going to stop there. I think we're going to have a Q&A now, but let's just say thank you again to Monica and Sanvi for joining. Really appreciate them. And I think Laurel is going to be coming back to the stage, maybe? Is that what's happening? I don't know.
You're thinking about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So as Laurel said, we'll be doing Q&A. We do have a number of really great questions, so I just want to say off the top, if we don't get to your question, please know we'll follow up by email. So the first question for the panel is, what is the best way to increase awareness of 988 other than talking about it in airports, especially in communities of color?
Yeah. Is my mic on? Are our mics on? Yeah?
Yes.
I think they are.
Say something.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the latter part of that question I really love, and you kind of touched on it too. You need to meet people where they are. And so that means talking about 988 in non-traditional places. For me, obviously, I'm carrying magnets where I go. I gave them all out, but I carry things to try to make that message, whether I'm in a hair salon, rather I'm in the grocery store, rather it is the internet provider coming to my house to fix my internet speed. You literally have to meet people where they are. You have to have connections, particularly, I'll speak communities of color. I'm a black person out of a community of color. And so one of the things that I know just from my own history and culture, we didn't talk about mental health. And so what I came from a family who would say, a mother who would say often, like, oh, that person just needs to pray, they just need to go to church. That is what's wrong with them. But she's been transformed, and now she will say they need a therapist, and they can still pray, but they need these other things. So you have to reach people where they are and respect the cultural differences, respect the history and the context so that you can have those conversations about why this is meaningful and why it's important. And there's so many different ways to do that I wish I had so much more time, especially as a mother of two emerging adults, black boys. I have a 22-year-old and 19-year-old. And they have taught me, they're my own little focus group and their friends, how to engage with them and how to communicate with communities that may not always be trusting of, well, what happens when I do and what's the response I'm going to get.
Okay. Okay. So for the next question, do we have examples of programs or services that schools can implement so students are more likely to trust these kinds of services and turn to them when they're in need?
Yeah, sure. I think it really depends kind of on the demographic of students within that institution as well. I think like something that I've seen to be successful recently is a lot of the creation of like diverse kinds of care resources on campus. So a lot of the times, like I feel like when we initially thought about like a school-based mental health program, there was like very much like a one-size-fits-all approach to mental health support in the school-based context, and it's usually to really just view like your mental health in relation to your academic performance rather than, you know, as a human being, holistically. So I think one thing that I've seen to be incredibly interesting has been, especially like I can talk more about higher education. Like Berkeley has, I think, around like over a dozen different kinds of like mental health like types of services, and also culturally competent services. So the integration of like mental health care resources within our cultural centers. For example, our LSRC, which is our Latina Student Resource Center, also has counselors who are Latina who are from that community, right? And that creates a sense of trust that's really important. I think it also ties back into the last question. Like I'm South Asian, and I don't think I really had anybody talking. I didn't know anyone who was actually South Asian who talked about mental health like when I was younger, and now there are a lot more of them, and I'm so happy that there are, because like I want other like Sonbis in the world to know that there are people like them talking about this. So I think whatever we can do to contextualize your identity in the context of your school can be really, really helpful. So leveraging these faith-based institutions on campus, leveraging community cultural centers, and integrating mental health within that rather than making it something that students have to reach out to fit into, I think is really, really important. So I think it ties back into your answer earlier about like meeting people where they're at.
Can I add something to that as well too? 'Cause that was a great response. I think that educational systems in general, you have to be able to tie the mission that they have with why mental health affects everyone, or behavioral health, because I'm speaking mental health and substance misuse, and not only become interested when there's a crisis or something bad has happened. And so really trying to change the culture of not being reactionary because something happened, but being able to be a safe space that recognizes that the better you are as a whole individual, that your brain is a part of you. Your brain is a part of you, and that makes you a better student. It makes you, if graduation is what's important, like whatever those goals are, tying it to that and not just in the moment of the crisis, because there is a before and there is an after. And so how do we do that in a way that it speaks the language of the institutions?
I just want to add really quickly too, you can go on our website to see if your state requires mental health or suicide prevention education in the curriculum. And if not, we need to do that in your state to incorporate in the curriculum to more normalize the conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. The next question we have is whether this bill addresses digital ID cards in addition to physical ID cards.
That is a good question. Right now, it's just physical ID cards in the bill. But if a school doesn't issue physical IDs, the school has to put this information accessible on their website so that, whenever a student logs in or goes to their website, they'll see it. But that's a really good question. And I know that as we sort of shift from physical student IDs and physical world things to online world things, we're gonna have to figure out how to make that accessible and sort of mold that to the needs of a newer generation that really does rely on everything online. So that's a great question. I think for now we're going to be focusing on the physical side of things, and then also having an online option. I'm wondering if it would be possible for a school to use their virtual IDs as the fulfillment for the requirement to publish this online. I actually don't know the answer to that question. That's a really good question. So we'll have to check in with the bill sponsors who we've been working with to sort of see what that vision is.
Yeah, and that might be one of the flexibilities of
Yeah.
law, but we'll definitely get back to y'all.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Chelsea's motioning to me. Do we have time for one more or no? All right.
Well, before we end, thank you so much for your questions. And Sanvi, I went to a UC system too. I went to UCLA, but in my sophomore year,
Go
I could
Bears.
barely find my way from the class back to my dorm. I wasn't an executive director of an organization, so kudos to you. Thank you so much, Monica, Sanvi, and Joanna for this powerful presentation. And remember, awareness. 988 awareness. We are all ambassadors of 988. We don't also have to be under anesthesia, but we will be ambassadors, okay? So thank you very much again. Woo! Thank you. So joining us for this session, we have Stephanie Grosser, who's a technology lead for 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline and Behavioral Health Crisis Team at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Stephanie joined SAMHSA about 8 years ago as the U.S. Digital Service within the Executive Office of the President. There she worked as a bureaucracy hacker to deliver, improved public-facing digital services to the American people across several federal agencies, including the State Department, the Small Business Administration, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Office of Personnel Management. And Stephanie is joining me here to my left. And also joining us, we have the esteemed Hannah Wasilowski. I always mess up your name. I'm so
No, you're good, you're good.
Wasilowski, Chief Advocacy Officer and longstanding partner at NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Hannah leads NAMI's government relations, policy, and advocacy team, which develops NAMI's policy positions, advances NAMI's federal priorities, and supports the policy work of NAMI's alliance at the state and local level. In particularly, Hannah leads NAMI's crisis response advocacy and thought leadership, including NAMI's Reimagined Crisis Initiative. And you saw on the last panel, we had a slide up there from Monica on the Crisis Reimagined Coalition, and AFSP is so pleased to be a partner on that, as well as a variety of diverse organizations at both the state and national and local level, really to advance 988. Next, we have a new partner, and I'm so pleased to announce our new partner with AFSP, Jim Brewer, Director of Government Relations with North America's Building Trades Union. Jim has been in government affairs and lobbying for 15 years. During this time, he has delivered signature policy wins for the building trades unions and trade associations, employing him at the federal and state levels of government. Brewer has authored numerous pieces of legislation that have been signed into law by multiple presidents and governors. In recent years, Brewer played a critical lobbying role in authoring and passing the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. It's a mouthful there, right? We are so pleased to have this powerful panel, and of course, moderating this panel for the connection is our own Emily Feltrin, who is our Senior Director of Federal Policy and Advocacy. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists. But before that, we have video remarks from two founding senators of the Bipartisan Senate Mental Health Caucus and the Senate authors of the Local 988 Crisis Response Act. And I'm going to turn it over to Senator Alex Padilla of California and Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina.
Hi, I'm Senator Alex Padilla, and it's an honor to join AFSP for your 15th Annual Advocacy Forum. It was important for me to be with you today, not just as the co-founder of the Bipartisan Senate Mental Health Caucus and a proud husband of, my wife Angela's a mental health advocate, but because I recognize the scale of the crisis that we're up against. In 2022, 49,000 people in the U.S. died by suicide. That's one person every 11 minutes, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. Behind every number was a person and a family, and unlived potential. So last fall, when I first asked my colleague, Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, to join me in founding a bipartisan Senate Mental Health Caucus, we were committed to making it a meaningful, productive caucus. We wanted to find bipartisan solutions that could save lives. And we already knew the power of the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in supporting Americans in crisis across the country. But for all its potential, we also knew there was more work to do. That's why last December, we came together to introduce the Local 988 Response Act of 2023, legislation that would change the way the FCC routes calls to 988. By working to route calls based on a caller's actual location, instead of their phone's area code, we can make sure we provide care as safely and as quickly as possible. Because when it comes to saving lives, every second counts. And earlier this year, I was proud to see the FCC heed our calls and announce the first step to implement geo-routing for calls placed to 988. It's a critical step to ensuring people can get access to care as quickly as possible when they need it the most. And I'll continue calling on the FCC to move quickly to implement this rule. But in the meantime, we know we can still do more to make sure all calls and texts can reach 988 regardless of how someone's calling. I want to thank each one of you for all that you do to advocate for better access to life-saving resources. You've been a vital partner in our fight to make sure no one has to suffer in silence, and a partner in saving lives. So thank you, and best of luck this week as you make your way to Capitol Hill.
Hi, I'm Tom Tillis, Senator from the great state of North Carolina. Thank you to the Foundation for Suicide Prevention for the work you do for those affected by suicide. As someone who has personally experienced behavioral health issues, and I've lost a loved one to suicide, these issues are profoundly personal to me. I'm deeply worried about the rise in the number of people who die by suicide, particularly among our youth, and I'm working to find solutions in Congress. As co-founder and co-chair of the Senate Mental Health Caucus, I was proud to help write and pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which marked the largest federal investment in community-based mental health care in our nation's history. And we recently celebrated the news of further improvements to the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline that will expedite the process of connecting persons in crisis with rapid, localized care. I'm hoping this will have a profound effect on saving lives, but our work's not done yet. I will continue to work with my colleagues on common sense solutions to increase access to high quality care and end the troubling trend of victims of suicide. But none of this can be done without the dedication and commitment of organizations like AFSP. So thank you again for your work and your advocacy. I hope you enjoy your time in Washington, and please never hesitate to reach out to my office for any ideas, suggestions, or help. God bless you, and thanks for all you do.
So I am excited to get this session started with our great panel of speakers that Laurel introduced. When we think about connection for this session, we can think about it in terms of connecting people to 988 locally, as quickly and safely as possible with those contact centers within their communities. But I'd like to take a little liberal view of connection as well. And I think one of the best ways that we can foster connection is through our own vulnerability. I know I'm inspired by so many of you in the room through that. And just to be fully transparent, my own mental health, I woke up this morning not really feeling my best. This isn't the day that I don't want to feel my best. I want to get up here and present so well to you. But I thought to myself, if there's ever been a crowd to speak to about the power of connection and vulnerability, it's this one. So I just want to invite you today to, as we think about connection throughout this session, to think about all the different ways we can connect with each other, with your folks from your state that you're sitting with those around the table, with our speakers, and with members of Congress and their staff. We are all human, and that's such a powerful thing to connect through that human vulnerability. So with that said, I also think we can think about connection through our partnerships with suicide prevention advocates and those speakers we have today on our panel. So first, I'm going to introduce Jim Brewer to come up and provide some comments about the importance of 988 to NABTU's interests and to the construction industry. I would say just one of the best parts of advocacy work is those new connections you make with partners and allies. As Laurel said, this is a new connection. The work that Jim and NABTU are doing are a perfect example of one of those partnerships that we've seen come to fruition through AFSP's partnership with Bechtel and the construction industry. And we're just so excited to have you here with us today. So Jim, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Everybody can hear me. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Laurel. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of North America's Building Trade Unions, and thank you all for what you do. We are not foreign by any means to trying to address suicide prevention in a variety of different ways, which I'll get into it here in a minute. But we are new to the policy space on this, and it's really a pleasure to be here and start this partnership as we did formally at the Bechtel event a couple months ago with their $7 million commitment to target specifically suicide prevention in the construction industry, with about roughly 500,000 workers, trying to reach, 500,000 workers here in the next 5 years. North America's Building Trade Unions, just in case you aren't familiar, and I'm not going to give a diatribe about unions right now, so don't worry. But a lot of people aren't familiar with what we do outside of building buildings and bridges and airports and railroad, et cetera. We've got a lot of money here lately to do that, which is great because it provides career opportunities for people to come into the trades and work on many jobs, not just one. What we do in communities across the country, whether it's a right-to-work state or if it's not a right-to-work state, is bring people in to one of our 14 affiliates. We are the umbrella union for all of the construction trades. Each one of our affiliates is the painters union, the sheet metal workers, the iron workers, the electricians, operating engineers. The list is almost endless until you get to number 14. 3.5 million members in the United States and Canada is who we represent on a daily basis. We advocate for their wages. We advocate for them being able to get a job, because every day they step on a job site is another day that they're working themselves out of a job, and that they may be in a financial strait if they don't have another job lined up. Which is why it's so important that they would join the union in the first place, is to have that financial security, which obviously leads into bleeds into other aspects of life, but also to get trained. And this proposition that we have for folks, that's the only reason to join the union. We will train you for your career. You can come in 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6 years of training in a particular craft, depending on the particular craft, and you will be a full-fledged electrician, iron worker, having job opportunities endless across the nation. And that model in and of itself, that financial security, the economic security that we can give people, is one way that it frankly is helping to combat mental health illnesses and helping to prevent suicides. But the thing is, what we recognize is that's not the only solution. It's part of the solution. And what we have done overall, in addition rather to just having that model of being able to train people and offer careers, is we've long ago, and this really goes to the roots of building trade unions and why they were formed in the first place, the commitment to making sure there are safe job sites. And safety in this sense is a broadly defined. We advocate on behalf of workers, not just for their financial, but for their safety and health on and off the job site. And that's one of the reasons we have our nonprofit that we started decades ago, CPWR. And one of the pillars of their agenda, especially in the last, in the recent history, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years or so, is with suicide prevention and addressing mental health issues. Even just last year, they began an initiative, because roughly what they focus on is funding occupational safety and health research, training, and providing services to construction workers who are in need of them, again, on and off the job site. But last year even, they have started to partner with universities like Purdue, Iowa, to hone in on what's the cause of suicide on our job sites, right? What can we do to help prevent it? What can we help to do to address it? Upstream factors, et cetera. $50,000 worth of grants to each participant that enrolls in this program to do a research project around this. Again, whether it be focused on one particular craft or all of the construction crafts combined. Some really groundbreaking stuff here, and especially with the funding from all the infrastructure legislation and laws that we've seen the last several years, it's a golden opportunity to really dig in to try to figure out how we can best service construction workers and their families to get through mental health and illnesses and, pray to God, prevent suicide. The other thing that we've actually rolled out, and this has actually even been since the Bechtel event a couple months ago, is a job site certification where we will partner with the general contractor. It's called RESPECT, the RESPECT job site certification. And one of the aspects of that, outside of making sure a job site has clean facilities and other aspects that you would obviously want to have if you're a construction worker on a job site, is mental health and substance abuse programs to prevent those from happening. Like I was saying, construction workers are unique. They don't go to build the same, number one, the same job site every day, and they don't have that consistency, right? Their consistency is inconsistency when it comes to where they're going. Sometimes they're out there, right? I mean, we camps in the middle of nowhere to go build a mine, or go build a power plant, or maintain a semiconductor factory that's outside of town, pretty far. So again, we want to make sure they have the resources, which is one of the reasons we've started this job site certification that has such a big part of it being mental health and substance abuse programs in it. It's also the reason, because of that unique nature of construction workers, why we are jumping on board your effort with the 988 bill. And we are a bipartisan organization. A lot of folks wanted to define unions as Democrat only. We are not like that. We love bipartisanship. Frankly, in this town, it's the only way to operate. People will figure that out one day up there. So we love bipartisanship. And frankly, this, regardless of that, we would be on board this effort. And for a construction worker, wherever they are, they need to be able to get help as quickly as possible, as conveniently as possible. And so this is a natural fit for us. At the Bechtel event a couple months ago, our president, Sean McGarvey, made the point that decades ago, and really, well, for us, a little over 100 years ago, when construction unions really became a thing, and again, with the basis of protecting worker safety and health on the job site. Decades ago, when you had OSHA begun formally as an agency, there was this mindset of, how are we going to be able to lower construction fatalities on the job site? This is going to be an impossible lift. Well, look where we are today. There are still, of course, fatalities, unfortunately, on the job site, but the consistency and the muscle memory of putting measures in place on a job site that maintain that safety throughout the life of a project. And then even afterwards, when they go into another job site, just common things that we take for granted today on a construction job site that, back in the day were considered, wow, I don't know, how are we gonna get everyone in the world to do that? Our president made the point that we need to do the same thing with mental health abuse and substance abuse and trying to prevent suicide on job sites. So that becomes the muscle memory for the future, where one day we can say, well, of course, that's gonna be present on a job site. Why would it not be? So again, we look forward to the partnership with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and partner organizations as well, so that we can get this bill passed and find out other ways to work together on the Hill as well as off the Hill. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim, for those inspiring remarks and for continuing the theme of connection. We will spend quite a bit of time going over the ins and outs of the bill, but we did want to spend some time with Stephanie talking about how to increase awareness of 988, some of the things that have been going on at SAMHSA with geo-routing, to kind of dive in a little bit more on that. So Stephanie?
Great. Hey everyone, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy you're all here as well. I'm the technology lead, as you heard, for 988 at SAMHSA. And so today I'm going to talk about geo-routing and also about some of the improvements we've made to make it easier for different groups to access 988, some of which you may know about, some of which you may not. And so one of the questions I always ask myself about 988 being on the operations side is how can we make 988 as accessible as possible for as many users as possible? And so we've been busy this past year increasing these access points for 988. So to go over a couple, and again, some of these may be familiar to you. Very recently, we launched Pride, which is a new keyword for LGBT youth to access 988 on texting. We also, in January, went live across the country with a new message when you call 988 that's went from 45 seconds to 30 seconds and really shortened the amount of time to connect to care, which now results in 114,000 more connections to a counselor every year because of that shortened experience. We've worked with screen reader technologies, so when someone hears the words 988 from a screen reader, it doesn't say 988, but actually reads 988 like they would expect. We've expanded access for Spanish chat and text to make that 24/7, whereas that started out as a more limited pilot. And we also launched a video phone service, so people who are deaf or hard of hearing can now access 988 through an ASL sign language counselor instead of going through an interpreter. We also expanded our voice LGBTQI network to 24/7, whereas that also started with a smaller pilot. So that was a pilot with Trevor, and now it's an entire subnetwork with multiple providers. We also, in our chat experience, we had a tool to confirm you're not a robot, the reCAPTCHA tool some of you may be used to. We had a lot of feedback from the blind community that was really difficult to go through. And so we upgraded to a new version that's more automatic and doesn't require any action on the part of the user. And we also, I'm not sure if you guys have heard the message for 988, but in January, we also introduced press 0 at any time to go directly to a counselor, so that if you're the 75% of callers who don't want to press 1, 2, or 3, you can bypass the entire 30 seconds and go straight into the queue for a counselor. But we're not done. Those are some things we've done, but there's so many more access points we're always thinking about. Some of those include when paralyzed callers dial 988 but can't actually press 1 or 2 or 3. How do we make sure that they can access those services? Or for Puerto Ricans during a hurricane when cell phone towers are down, how can they still get through? For tribal nations with poor cell coverage, how do we make sure they can always access 988? And the list goes on and on. Right now we have chat and text for English and Spanish, but not for other languages. So these are questions that we're always thinking about. How can we do better? And we always want feedback from the community to help us drive our priorities. We do get a lot of feedback. If you've been to 90datelifeline.org, there's a contact us page, and we're always looking through the most common complaints. Some of the most common complaints I read about when I started included, why are you playing jazz music when you're on hold for 988? That doesn't make any sense, and it stresses out a lot of callers. I'm one of those people that get stressed out by jazz music. It doesn't calm me, so I was like, yes, let's fix this. People were also asking, in our chat and text, why are you actually giving me a message saying, here's our terms of service, press yes to accept before you could access that service? They're like, we're in crisis, we don't have time to actually read and accept proactively a terms of service. Or another complaint I've read and heard a lot about is, why is your pre-chat survey so long before we can access a counselor? And so, we went to the National Mall last summer. We interviewed people about our language, like the voice that you hear to make it less robotic. We interviewed people about the music choices that they would prefer. And we asked people, what about the script do they think was confusing or could be truncated? And so we launched 2 national A/B tests to kind of gauge in real time, using data after we conducted the user research, what played better. And then we did 2 different iterations of changing that experience. We also, a couple months ago, changed our terms of service so that on text, now it is passive. Like most crisis lines, now it says, by continuing to text with us, you accept our terms of service, and then sharing that terms of service. So that's no longer required to say, yes, we accept. And then we're not here yet, but we're probably a month and a half away from launching a new pre-chat survey that fits on one screen. So you don't have to scroll down through many questions to access the start a chat button and get help immediately as fast as possible. So that was just a bonus, some bonus slides for you all in case you weren't familiar with all those things. But I'm really here, and I have 5 minutes, but I'll go fast. I talk fast. A question that is our #1 priority at 988, and it's a #1 priority for centers and states, is how do you ensure that 988 interactions get sent to your nearest to your physical location and not based on the area code you're calling from. This matters for a lot of reasons. One is community care, so that when we refer you to resources, you actually get connected to local trusted resources, and we know that you actually get help, and we build trust in the system, both through the referral connection and also you're talking to someone locally who understands what you may be going through. Safety is another reason. When there's an imminent risk situation, which is 2% or less of our calls, but when that happens, our counselors are using a 911 PSAP lookup tool where they enter the phone number, and oftentimes they're always entering the phone number of the caller, but again, that may connect you to the wrong PSAP instead of where the person is actually located. And so we're wasting critical seconds and not getting people immediately to the nearest PSAP to them. It also matters because a lot of states and centers have different suicide crisis lines that are not 988, and until we launch georouting, they're unwilling to decommission their local lines, because it's really critical for people calling locally to get local resources and access to local counselors. Once we activate georouting, they'll be able to more and more really consider decommissioning those lines and promoting one single phone number, 988, which will, we know, save lives. And finally, there's a lot of funding that is being given by states and local resources, appropriations, new fees on telephone tax fees. And so those fees are meant to fund local local callers, but today states don't know who's calling, if it's a local caller or someone with an area code who no longer lives in that state. So that makes it really hard to even budget what the need is in their state, since all the data is really representing not just local callers, but callers farther away as well. And that's why we've been really focusing on geo-routing as our #1 priority this year. And so, well, at least in the technology space, I'll say. And so I always like to say up front that geo-routing is not geolocation. The FCC hosted a geolocation forum last summer where we heard a lot of concern around geolocation. So geolocation, which is not what we're working on, is getting the pinpoint location of where someone is for the purpose of giving that to dispatch in case of an emergency. That made a lot of people very uncomfortable because they didn't want the police to have us to have their pinpoint location for dispatch. And they told us they would no longer, their communities may no longer call 988 if we had that. And so until we had more forums around privacy and safety, we wanted to really focus on something that seemed to have very broad support among everyone, which is geo-routing, which just means instead of getting someone's precise location, you're getting the general boundary area based on the nearest cell phone tower to where they're located, and using that to transmit the call without keeping any kind of location information on file of the person. And so how geo-routing works is that someone with their cell phone, this is for wireless calls, you would call 988 based on the nearest cell tower. That tower would generate the location site information of the tower, which is translated into a boundary. So consider like a county boundary, and that county boundary information is transmitted with the call. And so that's what our network would receive, is actually the destination code, and we would translate that back to like an area code connected to counties, which it's complicated, but we have a routing table where we'd route that to the nearest center based on that destination code. And so that was a little technical, but I just want to talk about the progress that we've made in this area, because we've made a lot of progress over the last year. We're working with 3 major US carriers right now, very actively, and we have been over the past year to test and develop and implement geo-routing solutions. And so we're done with the solution design phase, and we're really in the phase where carriers are already sending us the new destination information into our network, but we have upgrades we've been making in parallel on our side so we could actually see the information because they're coming into upgraded call data fields. And as we start having the full amount of data per carrier, and then can do traffic analysis studies to see what the volume shifts are per center, then we can start activating geo-routing. It's possible that as soon as sometime in September, we'll see the first carrier begin activating geo-routing. And so unless there's major hiccups that come up, that's what we're working toward right now. But it's not just something that we're waiting on the carrier. It's the carriers that are a piece of it. It's the centers who need to be ready to staff up their FTE to handle any major increase in volume, and the communications we need to do with the whole country to make sure everyone's comfortable and knowledgeable about this change. And again, there's no precise location information. I'm just going to say that again. And so I want to just conclude by talking about the recent FCC action in this space. The FCC sent industry a letter encouraging them to test geo-routing solutions with us last September. And a couple months ago, they actually issued a proposed rulemaking on geo-routing. And so there's many questions that they propose for the public to answer or to wireless carriers to answer. Some of those questions include, would you like this for texting and not just voice? Right now, we're focused 100% on voice, not for texting. And so they ask how important these solutions are to address both of them. They ask about any privacy concerns with the geo-routing as we've laid it out. And so anyone is welcome to respond to the FCC proposed rulemaking through June 28th. And I know I'm done, but my last comment, sorry, is that the best news about the proposed rulemaking is that although it has the tier 2 and 3 carriers, which are the smaller US carriers, have told us that Now that this proposed rulemaking has come out, they kind of want to pause on working with us until they see the final rule. And usually an FCC rulemaking process can take over a year. But the good news is that the major state carriers are so deep in with us working on this. None of them said they're going to pause. They all said they're going full steam ahead. And the FCC put in their proposed rulemaking, as you can see, that they support voluntary efforts by carriers and SAMHSA right now to deploy near-term solutions that we've been working on. And so no one has said to pause work. It's still moving forward. Thank you so much. Happy to take questions afterward.
Great job. Woo! Awesome. Thank you for all of that really detailed information, but I think it sets us up really, really well to now dive in to talk a little bit more about the bill and what you all will be going to the Hill for tomorrow. So our wonderful partner organization, Hannah Wesolowski from NAMI, will talk a little bit about the Local 988 Response Act and give you a little bit of a good overview of what that bill's all about. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks. Hey everyone, it's so great to be with you. I just want to express my thanks to Bob, to Laurel, to the entire team, and to all of you. This has been a true partnership in the way that I've never seen in my career in government affairs. AFSP and NAMI have been working in lockstep at not only the national level, but the state and local level to make sure everyone gets the help they need. I thank all of you who have worked with NAMI, who've joined our monthly state advocate calls around 988. We're just so grateful for this continued partnership because I think we have a shared goal and shared vision, and it's been really wonderful to see that move forward. So you heard a bit about this, but what I've learned is that we can't talk about this too much, the difference between geo-routing versus geolocation. I was actually at NAMI's national conference last week, and it was a good reminder that we need to reinforce what the difference is. How many of you in this room live in some place that doesn't match the area code for your cell phone? Yep, I think that kind of highlights the need here. People travel, you're here in DC, so if you needed 988 right now, you might not be matched up with the call center in this area unless you had a 202 area code. So there's a lot of need for this, and we have been advocating since the 988 legislation passed for geo-routing to be put in place because there has been a massive infusion of effort, of resources, of time to build up services to help people who contact 988 who need not only the help on the phone, but in some cases more help than can be provided over the phone. And as Stephanie mentioned, some states are hesitant to promote the 988 number because they want to help the people locally. And the work that you have all done locally to make sure those services are in place needs to reach the people it's intended for. So geo-routing is important. It has broad support. Broad support. Everyone agrees this is the right thing to do. Geolocation, a little bit different. As you heard, geo-routing is to get to the nearest call center. Specific location information is not included, and that's really important. You know, the key to 988 is it's anonymous, it's confidential. You don't have to share that information. And from NAMI's perspective, and I know the perspective of many of you, we know there's still a lot of stigma and discrimination out there. So we want to make sure if there's ever specific location information, how is that protected? How do we ensure that when people call for help and they get dispatch, services, that information isn't used against them in the future? People have experienced real trauma in trying to reach out for help and the response that they get. So we need to be very thoughtful for it. So geolocation, that's way in the future. There's a lot more conversations that need to happen, different technology, and there's a lot of stakeholder disagreement and stakeholder concerns around this. So it's really important that we know the difference, and sometimes we have to educate legislators about that difference as well, because they will use the terms interchangeably, and they're very different, and they have very different meanings, particularly for our communities. So the Local 988 Response Act. So quick facts, and you'll hear a lot more from Emily. It's bipartisan in both chambers, House and Senate. It was introduced in 2023, so that was before some of this action moved forward, but there's still a lot more in this bill. Essentially, we look at it as creating parity in how you access 988 compared to how you access 911. We want to make sure that any of the solutions and tools and ways that you can connect to 911 are there for 988. And it makes sure that these rights to accessing 988 are enshrined in law. So first, routing calls. So you heard about this, and there's already action on this. So this is moving forward without legislation. The legislation goes a little bit further than the rules currently, because it also requires FCC to act on text messaging. Now, we heard that text messaging is coming. It's a future step. It takes different technological solutions. I can't pretend that I understand any of the technology behind it, but we know that that's also needed. We know the best response is always going to be a local response. We want to help people in the moment, but we want to connect them to the resources to get well and stay well. So this also specifies no specific location information will be shared. So again, protects that privacy, but does require the FCC to put out those rules and finalize those rules on not just phone calls, but also text messages. So the other thing that this legislation would do would help people during outages or with inactive plans. So right now, if you had an inactive phone, your old phone, it's not connected to any network, but you had battery power, you can contact 911 on it. We want to make sure that that's available for 988 as well, so that any phone, even if you don't have an active plan, can contact 988 with that battery charge. Additionally, right now for 911, if there's an outage on your carrier, so say I have Verizon, put that out there. If Verizon had an outage, but I needed to call 911, it's gonna connect me to another carrier to make sure that call gets through. This makes sure that that's available for 988 as well. So we need these similar solutions that we already have for 911 in place for 988. No one should be unable to connect to the 988 resource. And then finally, it makes it easier to contact 988 from hotels, offices, and other businesses. How many of you have been in an office or a hotel where you have to dial 9 before dialing a full number? Right? So there, in the Federal Communications Act, 911, there's now a requirement, Carl's Act from a few years ago, that any new phones put out, you don't have to dial 9 to reach 911. We want to make sure, again, we remove any single barrier to people connecting to 988, and so this would extend that provision in the law to 988 as well. So in the next few years, any new phones that are implemented, any new phone systems, if people need help, if they're in a hotel, they're in an office, wherever they may be, they don't have to dial any number before dialing 988. We don't want to create any confusion. So again, this is extending what's already in place for 911 to 988. So, I think the key point here is if we are building a system that is an alternative to 911 for people to reach out for help, then we better make sure that alternative has every possible solution and tool in place. 988 has to be as accessible as 911, and that's really what the local 988 Response Act would do. We have a lot of resources at NAMI, so we work really closely with AFSP. We mentioned Reimagine Crisis, so reimaginecrisis.org tracks state legislation, so reimaginecrisis.org/map. You can track that state legislation of what's happening across the country, all the good work you're doing, but see what your peers are doing as well. And NAMI does a lot of public opinion polling around 988, and we actually just had the latest poll out in the field around awareness. So hope to have some of that data point, those data points soon to share with you all. But again, I just want to thank AFSP for this opportunity and thank all of you for your advocacy, because none of this happens without you. So thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. That sets us up really, really nicely for our next sort of deeper dive into the bill to really get you feeling good and groovy and ready to go for tomorrow when you're on the Hill. So we're going to dive into the bills, the differences between the bills, and the differences between what's happening with the FCC. We've heard from Stephanie and Hannah in particular about those differences. I'm going to remind you of a little fun fact that we repeated a number of times on the pre-forum webinar, that you don't have to be experts, right? The public policy team, my colleagues, myself, we are all here to help all of these tricky questions, to help with the details. So think of this as familiarity, not memorization, not expertise. You got this. All right. So the Senate bill is sponsored by Senator Alex Padilla, we just heard, his colleague, Senator Tom Tillis. The bill right now is in the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. The House bill, sponsored by Representative Cardenas from California. California, I know you love to raise your flags. Representative Fitzpatrick, Pennsylvania, where are you at? There you are, all right. That bill's been referred to the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Pop quiz, why do these names all sound familiar? They are all winners of AFSP's Allies in Action Award. Yes, obviously we are honoring them for their work and commitment to 988, including on this bill as well. So what do these bills do? I'm gonna go through these slides fairly quickly. We've talked about them in the pre-forum webinar, and you heard really a nice overview from Hannah just now about those bills. I will say, I'm a very visual person, so if someone asks me, what's the difference between geo-routing and geolocation, and I'm just thinking, words, brain must come up with difference. It's tough, right? Why did they name them so similarly? Obviously, there's a reason for that, but I like to think in terms of Where's Waldo? And maybe that's because I have kids. My kids are elementary school age. They like Where's Waldo? Geo-routing, you know Where's Waldo is somewhere on this page, okay? You just don't know exactly where. He's definitely on this page. Geolocation, Where's Waldo is on this beach, and I'm gonna find him. Okay, so that's my little trick. Maybe it'll help some of you. If not, forget everything I just said. The bills also ensure that carriers allow calls and texts. As Hannah said, there is that distinction between the FCC rule, as well as those inactive phone plans, making sure that those can connect with 988. That multi-line systems, making sure we can call without having to press 9 or some other number. Okay, this is one of those, this is too technical for me to remember questions, but I thought it would be worth at least raising for your awareness. The idea that a staffer or a member of Congress is gonna turn to you and say, okay, but tell me the differences between the House and Senate bills tomorrow when you're on the Hill is very unlikely. Still, you can say, we went over that yesterday. I'll have the policy team get back to you if you really have questions about that one. But just to raise awareness about it, there are some differences between the two bills. The Senate bill requires timelines slightly different. FCC must issue those regulations 90 days after enactment. House bill, 270 days after enactment. They both have to implement, wrap things up within a year. The House bill also includes chat as well as calls and texts. Oh, just our friendly reminder, you're not expected to be a policy expert. Your expertise lies in telling your story. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about this. Many of you, hopefully all of you, are on our advocate email list. I know there's 54,000 folks who are on that list, so hopefully that includes every single one of you, which means you got our action alert to take action on this FCC rulemaking that's happening now. It's open till June 28th. We have a template that's available for you to go to the FCC's website, input, add your personal story if you'd like, and if you have something that you'd like to share. You can learn more about that at our Action Center, and we'll be following up with you after the forum too with additional opportunities before the end of June. The rule versus the bill. Okay, you heard about this from Hannah as well. There are some differences. So we know the FCC rule does not cover texting at this time. The FCC, which by the way, just acronym soup, the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. We're just reminding everyone. I know everybody knows that, of course, but always worth a reminder. Texting may be required in a future phase. Multi-line system requirements. FCC rule does not yet address that. Phones with no cell plans, no. But the bill does. So we need this bill. All right, we're gonna go through some of the talking points to help you prep for tomorrow. Again, going through these briefly, it's always worth kind of going through what are the things that I need to know, but I'll remind you, not only do you have your one-pagers in your packets, you also have what we like to call that palm card sheet, which is that nice white piece of paper, has all of these key talking points on there. So this is really just reiterating, we're talking about geo-routing. We want folks to be connected to those local contact centers. We know over 80% of all calls made to 988 are from cell phones, making it even more important now in this modern age of 2024. We need to make sure people are connected locally. And why do we care about people being connected locally? It improves access to local life-saving services. So our ask is to improve the routing of calls and texts to the 988 Lifeline by co-sponsoring and supporting the local 988 Response Act. Tell me more. Do you want to know more? Maybe not. This section is really about trying to think ahead to some of the questions that you might get when you're in those meetings tomorrow. So, staffer says, but isn't the FCC already taking action? Why do we need this bill? Well, hopefully the slides that we just went through, all of us, as our presentations talked about some of the differences between those bills. The importance is that geo-routing is enacted into law. The FCC rule process, it takes about a year, it's a longer process, and it doesn't include multi-line systems, it doesn't include texting. We want to make sure that geo-routing is the law of the land. What about the privacy of callers? Geo-routing only provides the general location. It's the Where's Waldo page, not the Where's Waldo on the beach. So people contacting 988 are not required to provide any personal data, and it's not pinpointing exact location. What about when a response is needed? Stephanie talked a little bit about that as well. We know, generally speaking, 988 dispatches emergency services for only about 2% of calls. And in those cases, there is coordination between the PSAP, 911, and 988, and that will still be able to continue. Geo-routing is that nice balance between the need for privacy, which we know is very important to many users, with the ability to continue to provide an emergency response in those rare cases when it's needed. Okay. With that, we will open it up for questions. Please feel free to ask any and all, and we will do our best to answer them.
Okay, starting us off, just saying one more time, we have a lot of really good questions here. We won't have time for all of them. So if your question is not answered, please know we'll follow up by email. Starting us off, we have a great question. Someone wrote saying that a common concern they've heard, especially among young people, is that if they are in active crisis and contact 988, they believe police will come to their location and force them into inpatient care. How would you respond to that concern? What's a good response to that misconception?
I'm happy to take that. So we get that question a lot as well, because that's been people's real experience in the past. They've called 911 for help and somebody comes and takes them to an emergency department where they're stuck for days, or in many cases, because of their symptoms, to jail. So, we very much try to reinforce that we know that this comes from real trauma and real experiences, but 988 receives no location. Right now, we don't even know where in the country you are, never mind precise location. This is not about dispatching services unless truly needed. 988 reduces the need to dispatch any in-person services because the call is the intervention. The text, the chat is the intervention for so many callers, and the goal is to connect you to additional resources in the community. So I think reminding people that their contact to 988 is the intervention, and that this actually reduces the need for an in-person response, and reminding everyone, this is anonymous, this is confidential, no one needs to share any of that information.
To follow up to that a little bit, so is there a way or a technology for the crisis worker to move from georouting to geolocation or to connect with 911 seamlessly? So, I know we're doing some of this on the state level and trying to make sure that the crisis calls, people answering the calls are trained on how to do that. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can talk about how the technology works. Is my mic on? Can you guys hear me? Okay, there we go. So how we're implementing georouting is as soon as the location is received from a carrier, like the destination code, we actually use it to route. We will use it once we activate to route the call to the local center. After we route it, we're going to actually get rid of that data. We're not going to. I don't know if it's turning off.
Okay, there we go.
We discard. Right?
Yeah, I think it's going in and out.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to use it to route the call once we receive the destination barrier information, boundary information, but then we're not going to even keep it in our system or pass it along to anyone else. So if we give a call, if someone presses 1 and it goes to the VCL, we're not even going to carry that location information onto them, even that boundary data. That's how carefully we're keeping that information. In terms of 911 and 988 access, you already heard the imminent risk policy. Like our counselors are trained only as the last case scenario. Should they utilize that policy, and that policy is available online. And we have confidentiality and privacy statements as well that let people know of that potentially happening in 2% approximately of our calls where we do need emergency services. And many states are getting mobile crisis dispatch for us to rely on as well. But that process by which 988 has a crisis, they go through this process with 911 where only 911 can actually contact a carrier to ask for the pinpoint location information. We don't even have the control to do that ourselves. And so that's how removed we are from those emergency situations when 911 has to get that info. If someone calls directly to 911, they know the pinpoint location, it conveys with the call, but when we transfer a call to 911, they don't magically have that information for 988 calls. They have to contact the carrier who owns that number to get that, like they would if the FBI was calling or if anyone was calling who needed, in that situation, that information. Hopefully that answers the question.
It absolutely does. Thank you.
That's really helpful. And can I just add one other thing, which is not about the technology of all of it, but just getting back to even what was talked about in our first session is just really the awareness piece, increasing understanding of how 988 works and how those, the interactions do occur, I think is important now and will continue to be increasingly important as geo-routing rolls out, because we know that those questions like that are out there now. They will increase as not only awareness of 988 increases, but then also the awareness of the change and shift over to geo-routing. So just working with SAMHSA in collaboration with our partners, with creative partners like NAB2 to really get the word out about how 988 works. I know that the FAQs on SAMHSA's website are great, the FAQs on Vibrant's website are great, but anything we all can do, you as individuals and with your chapters, to really increase awareness will be key as this all sort of rolls out over the next few months, years.
Another question we have concerns calls across state lines. So if the cell tower that's pinged is across state lines, could you speak to the interstate coordination on that and just sort of what that would look like if a caller's nearest call tower is across state lines?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that happens today with 911 calls as well. If there's a tower on the boundary and then the wrong state gets the call, that will happen with how we're designing geo-routing with the nearest cell tower. If the nearest cell tower happens to be in a different state, then that's the destination information we're gonna have for routing that call, and that person will sometimes, it depends which way the tower's pointed or other details, but it is possible that caller will get the crisis center in that other state. And so unless we had the more granular location information, we don't have a way of solving that yet. But we do think that's the edge case, and that for most, this will improve the great majority of our location issues to make sure you're in state, but that will happen in some instances. And we could work toward that edge case and figuring out more solutions for that after we do this initial activation.
So the top 3 states, since geo-routing is based on the cell towers, the top 3 states have large rural areas and populations. What's the plan to address areas perhaps out of reach of this technology?
Right now, all of the continental U.S. Should be covered by this. A lot of the territories also have agreements with some of the major carriers where we think it will work. There may be spots where geo-routing doesn't work right now. In those places, if for some reason we don't receive geolocation information for a call, it will default to area code again. And so that's our backup routing logic, is first look for the geo-routing information in the call header. If not there, then use the area code. As we figure out what those cases are that aren't covered, we'll be able to address those, but this will mainly affect like some of the territories, for example, or places in Alaska that have tier 2 or tier 3 carriers and aren't covered by the major 3 US carriers will be out of scope for this initial activation. And again, they've indicated that they want to wait, and some of them, not all, but many of them and their associations have indicated they may want to wait until the geo-routing rule happens and is finalized over a year from now. And so we do anticipate, unfortunately, a gap. However, some people in those locations, the only positive is may move around less than other people, so it may not be as big of an impact, but we care deeply about getting everyone geo-routing coverage in this country, and so we continue to have those conversations with the tier 2 and tier 3 associations to see what we can do to work with them to move things along any faster than we are today.
If I can just add, one of the key facets of 988 is that your call will always be answered, and so there's a core part that is the backup networks. So if a call center is ever inundated and doesn't have the resources, make sure that you talk to somebody, because we don't want anyone waiting. So that'll still be in place regardless if a call is routed to the right call center or not. There'll still be the backup networks to ensure that everyone can talk to somebody in a timely manner. And I think that's an important aspect of 988 as well.
Great. Does that wrap up our questions?
Yeah.
Well, if we have time, we have a couple more, but if we want to.
We have 15 minutes. First of all, I wanted to recognize Erin. She is doing what I can't anymore at age 57, is squatting on this floor here, and I really value that. So thank you so much. So we do have a few more time. So please get your questions in the QR.
Okay. So kind of on the flip side, 911 transferring to 988, are similar efforts being made to make sure that they know when and how to do that, or are they able to do that? Any information you can provide there?
There's a lot happening in that space and a lot of really interesting pilots throughout the country to increase the facilitation of warm transfers from 911 to 988. A lot of those calls may not go through 988, but still go through the 988 crisis center to a separate phone number. So right now it's hard for us to track all that information. But we're trying to beef up some of our data standardization practices to include more information about calls coming in from 911 so we could really track what that looks like and how many calls are being deferred, since that's something that we really have been pushing. And a lot of, those relationships happen very locally, where there's partnerships between 911 and 988, and they take years and years to build that trust so that 911 feels comfortable bringing calls to 988 and they know this center. And I think that will be another huge benefit of geo-routing, to make those local partnerships even stronger when they know their local calls, and that all the agreements that they've worked out at the local level will apply to the callers coming in who live locally.
Great. And another good question we have that came in concerns privacy concerns with 988. Could you speak more about how geo-routing helps to protect caller privacy and just ensures that no caller information is shared beyond just location unless that individual volunteers it?
Absolutely. So first of all, when anyone contacts 988, they can access services without providing any personal information. The geo-routing basically just changes the information that's carried over in the header of a call, which you guys don't see, but our system can see information in that call header. And so the only information that we'll be conveying with this new, with geo-routing once we activate is this number that has a destination element to it, so we know the approximate location. Again, once we get that approximate location, like what county, for example, or what wire center boundary the person is located in, we're just going to use that to route to our network and then throw away that information. There are several states that are building their own state centralized platforms, like California is a great example, where they're kind of building one system with taxpayer money for all their emergency services to be in one place. Even when we send a call in this new system to California, they won't be receiving that destination information. We just use it to route to California, and then we throw it away. And so we're doing everything to just make sure that it's a very broad level. We're getting as close as possible without risking anyone's privacy. And that's why the cell tower was identified as that closest location past the pinpoint level where people would be safe. We did look at locations even farther away, like switch technology, but then we could only guarantee a 50 to 100 mile radius, and the cell tower gets us like 2 to 10 miles. And so we really wanted to go with as granular as we could get, but again, with protecting everyone's privacy so no one could pinpoint where that person was.
And to follow up on that, just thinking about our first session as well, and our speaker Sanvi from the Youth Power Project was talking about some of these concerns, especially from youth, related to those privacy concerns. So, and we know youth, use texting, chat as a major form of communication. So can you just, when geo-routing does, assuming it does, roll out for texting, will that be the same process? Does that still need to be explored further? I know within the FCC rule, but would you be able to talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, I could say that texting will benefit from none of the advances that we've made on geo-routing for voice. It's completely different technologies and structures, and so it's basically like starting over from scratch on designing solutions per carrier. Unfortunately, with texting, the carrier infrastructure is not as standardized or advanced as voice, and so I think it will be more complicated, and it's taken us a while to get this far for voice. And so we've started those conversations, but they're just the beginning because we really wanted to focus on getting geo-routing activated for voice as soon as possible as our first priority. So we've only started those, but we know that's going to be a process. We're really happy that the FCC did put in questions on texting to the wireless industry so that they could start collecting some of that data. As far as chat, I don't know if folks know that we actually don't route chat the same way we do text and voice. Text and voice is area code, but chat, you saw a screenshot of the pre-chat survey we're launching, but the old and the new version both have a field. The first field in there is what's your zip code. It's an optional field that you don't need to enter, but if you enter it, we actually route your chat based on the zip code that you enter, not based on area code. And so chat is not covered in the FCC rules. That's more about if we wanted to figure out where people were with chat and confirm where they are, maybe we'd figure something out with the IP address, but we're definitely not there with chat yet. And if someone doesn't enter their zip code, it defaults to our national backup network so that we can make sure you get connected as soon as possible, even if it's not to your local crisis center.
Thank you.
Fantastic. This one is a question for Jim. What does the union think leadership on the job site should be doing to help make the workers feel supported in their mental health needs? And generally, what can be done to help support construction workers' mental health?
Sure. So great question, number one. So the hallmark of building trade unions, and whether this is a project that's, let's say, like a mega project where you would pretty much have all 14 crafts on the job site versus one that may just be like, let's say, like a bridge painting project where you pretty much just have like the painters on that project. The hallmark of either type of project is that there's a partnership with the contractor, because the responsibility falls on both those who are hiring workers for the job as well as those who are literally doing the job. And having that partnership is really the foundational step, which, to highlight the great partnership we have with Bechtel, it's a hand in glove on every aspect of the job site. So, having that awareness where you can know, listen, all the ins and outs and details of this project to then feed into strategies that will help workers address mental health issues or substance abuse, whatever have you. Several of our affiliates have peer-to-peer programs that they implement on the job site. With this RESPECT certification that I was talking about, once it's fully implemented and we're partnering with every contractor that we work with, which we, just for awareness, we partner with roughly about 95,000 contractors across the country So we're talking a huge swath of construction projects that will ultimately, as we implement this in the next several years, get this respect certification. The key here is it is contractual. It will be a legal part of the contract to hire workers to have this respect certification on the job site. So it's not something that's like, hey, would you like to participate? It's like, no, this is a part of the safety and health of the workers that you're hiring. Besides their high skill, we need to make sure they're safe. So peer-to-peer programs, the respect certification, and then also with the substance abuse issues that unfortunately lead to mental health issues, we also have started to address that with Narcan and other types of available tools on the job site that will, hopefully prevent a bad situation from happening.
All right, thank you. I just want to do a quick plug real quick. So you have easy access to the bills that we've been discussing today, afsp.org/federal bills. All the forum bills are right at the top. You can click a link to see their webpage as well as the sponsors, co-sponsors, and committees. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And you know what? I'm very thankful for this legislation because, as Emily said, we all know Waldo. We are glad that this legislation would help. No, Waldo's here on this page, he's not here on this page. And because we know he's on this page, we can then route him to the nearest local call center. I want to thank so much Stephanie and Jim and Hannah for your partnership on working on this legislation and others into the future. So please join me in thanking this panel on Connection, 988 Connection. So much and for answering all those questions. Before we leave for lunch, I'm looking at Ion here, and I want you to stand up because he is one of our interns for this summer working with the federal team. He was involved with the Youth Power Project and starting on another work as well. And you are in high school, right? High school. So we had a sophomore at UC Berkeley. We have a high school student. Amazing. This just shows you the great promise that we have of youth leaders. So. And I'm hopeful, I haven't seen them yet, but we also invited our partners from Trevor Project who work with us on much legislation at both the state and federal. So I'm not sure if Mark is here or Sarab, if they were able to join us. They may not have been here yet, but we did invite them here today to join us to walk through the awareness connection and follow up. So with that, I'm going to thank the panel once again, and then we got some prizes for those advocate bingo people. So, for our third session today, we are going to focus on follow-up care, as I said, awareness, connection, now follow-up care. And joining me on the stage, we have the Honorable Laura Herrera-Scott, physician, who is the Secretary for Behavioral Health within the Behavioral Health Administration at the Maryland Department of Health. Dr. Laura Herrera-Scott is a healthcare leader with expertise across decades in integrating value-based care philosophy with clinical and population health strategies. She is a visionary leader in the health space, spearheading the creation of progressive programs that optimize patient outcomes, improve the quality of care, and advance health equity. Most recently, Dr. Scott served as the Executive Vice President of Population Health at Summit Health and as Vice President of Clinical Strategy and Product at Anthem. She also brings MDH experience serving in the Department of Health and Mental Health Hygiene from 2011 to 2015 as Deputy Secretary of Public Health Services. Dr. Scott is a veteran of the United States Army Reserve, serving from 1998 to 2008 as a major in the Medical Corps. Next, we have Tia Dole. Yes, Tia Dole, who is the Chief 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline Officer with Vibrant Emotional Health. Dr. Dole is a licensed clinical psychologist and a longtime advocate for the rights of those with intersectional identities. Prior to stepping into her role, Dr. Dole was the executive director of the Steve Fund, the nation's only organization focused on the mental health and emotional well-being of young people of color. Dr. Dole was also the chief clinical operations officer at the Trevor Project, the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis services organization for LGBTQ youth. Dr. Dole oversaw all of Trevor Project's crisis services programs, as well as their volunteer community, and increased their impact by a factor of 4. And lastly, as our moderator, we are joined by our very own Bill White, who's our Senior Manager of Federal Policy. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you so much, Laurel, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to speak more in a little bit, but I just wanted to give another quick introduction for Secretary Laura Herrera-Scott, Maryland's Secretary of Health, and for Dr. Tia Dole, the Chief Lifeline Officer at Vibrant Emotional Health. This panel discussion is going to be about follow-up services, which are the services that are provided by crisis centers after a crisis. As Laurel said earlier, the first panel, of course, is about awareness, then about ensuring local access to local crisis centers through 988, and then this is about postvention and follow-up services, and specifically the CONNECT Act, federal legislation to provide funding for follow-up services. So with all that in mind, I'll be speaking more about the bill later, but I want to pass it over to Dr. Dole to begin our remarks.
Okay. Every time. Hey, everybody. I'm gonna, I can use this to advance my slide, yeah. Before I jump into the slides, I actually wanted to say a few things. Number one, thank you. It is actually sort of wild to me that we have a room full of people talking about suicide and not sort of cringing away from it the way that we had 20, 30 years ago. I'll say I started out my career in suicide prevention as a very young person, very young, in the 90s, actually working in an ER, talking to Black women who had made a recent suicide attempt. And I was 21, and talking to women who were in deep despair. And there was no 988. There was no real mobile crisis. There was nothing for these women to go to after they left the hospital. Because it was like a community-based hospital that had no resources, knowing that someone was going to be discharged to potentially make another attempt in their life. For me as a young person, I thought, this doesn't make sense to me. Our system is incredibly broken. And so then to come fast forward, 30 years to see this room full of people, all with the same purpose and the same direction, it really just, people are always like, you work in suicide prevention, isn't that boring? Or isn't it depressing? No, this is the best time to work in mental health. And so I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the work that you all are doing. You're literally helping people live, and that's a really incredible achievement. So I was talking to Bill, and one thing, before we get into the follow-up, I wanted to be clear about how 988 works. I know everybody has an idea in their head about what we do, but my first slide is, nothing that I say is the opinion of SAMHSA. We work closely with SAMHSA. You all saw Monica Johnson earlier, and let me be clear, that's how she actually is in real life. She is that wonderful. So I'll continue. One of the things is that 988, we launched in 2022, right? The 3-digit number. But everybody, it's been around for 20 years, and Vibrant's actually been the administrator for the entire time in some form. And Monica had shown that slide, which was like, $2 billion, right, to $510 million. That's not all 988 money. But in its first year, 988 served, a version of 988 served about 44,000 people. Now we serve between 10 and 12,000 people a day. And that kind of exponential growth, most of it has occurred in the last 2 years. So I think as you all, because they are all going on the Hill, y'all are going on the Hill tomorrow, yes? Okay, so you should know how this thing works. I feel like I can't see it clearly. Okay, here. So we are in a contractual agreement. It's called a cooperative agreement. And I guess this is a learning session. I hope it's not boring. But we are in a cooperative agreement. You can see this thing here with SAMHSA, right? What that means is that they're in our business every day in the best possible way. We are in constant communication with SAMHSA about how we are deploying, how things are working, QI, and I'll talk more about this. But if you look at this thing, we have something called the Unified Platform. It's really important for you all to know this. It is a product that we designed and give to crisis centers to use for free to answer calls, chats, and texts. So they can use it for free. It's really important. We do all the routing telephony. We maintain network performance. We do comms and marketing. We do wellness, right? We engage with crisis centers about, hey, you know, they might have an issue with the answer rate, but that actually might be oriented around, hey, you actually aren't supporting your crisis counselors at night. They're feeling overwhelmed. Has anybody here worked at a crisis center before? Yes. So crisis centers are unlike any other type of behavioral health thing. Crisis centers are an extremely delicate ecosystem. Right? It is a constant balance between maintaining wellness, maintaining answer rates, and maintaining quality that is not, it's almost impossible to describe unless you've been in that system. And it's really, two people can throw that whole balance off. So it's a lot of work the crisis centers are doing. And then we work along the crisis continuum. So if you all are asked, how does this work? Because actually I've spoken to Congress members and they actually mostly don't know how this works. We are in a contractual agreement. It's a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA. We are the administrators. 5 minutes. Okay. I'll go fast. Okay. Okay. So, you know, we have our stakeholders. We have crisis centers. And you can see at the bottom here, we have the contact. We call them contacts on the back end. But everybody has an opinion about 988, generally speaking. And for the first time in the last few years, the states are, you all, right, are becoming more and more invested. And when people invest money, they want to say, yes? I think the best analogy that I've heard is that in some ways, you know, Vibrant and SAMHSA, we're like the moms, right? The dad's been out of the picture the whole time, but he comes back in and he says, I'm paying for college. So that means I get a say in what you major in. That's sort of what the crisis centers feel like. Dad has come back in the picture, you know, not to use gendered terms. Okay. I just added this in here sort of randomly because this is just a sign that's in a parking lot. This is not something that we've done, actually. This is a state initiative. I was going to put a picture of someone. People have 988 tattoos now, but I didn't know if it was appropriate. But people have 988 tattoos, and when I see that, I'm always like, whoa, that is a real progress. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead. Now, actually, we have about 215 crisis centers. Bill is getting anxious because he's like, wrap it up. No? Okay. We have 215 crisis centers across the network. And that's a good number for you all to remember when you're speaking to folks. You know, we do a lot of support with them. But we have sub-networks. The way that it operates is that calls come in, right? They're routed right now via area code, and then they are routed via area code to their local crisis center. If they can't answer, it goes up to the backup call centers. I know I'm going very detailed, but I think it's important for everybody to know how, understand how this works. We also have subnet network. You press 1 if you're a veteran. You press 2 if you want to do have services in Spanish. And side note, we only had Spanish voice up until last July, and now we have Spanish chat and text. If you are an LGBTQ young person, you press 3. If you live in the state of Washington and you identify as Native American, you can press 4, and the calls are answered by folks who say their tribal affiliation. How can I help you? Which is actually incredibly meaningful for different populations, and other states are quite keen for this. And also for the first time, we offer our services for the deaf and hard of hearing via ASL. And one of those crisis centers actually also serves hearing folks on chat and text. And then we also have our disaster services. So when there's a disaster, folks can call a separate number to receive disaster-related help. Okay, I'm gonna skip. This is actually very small, and I know you can't see this. We have 1 million dashboards where we are tracking our work, our process. And so if people are like, well, what's on the back end of 988 is a lot of infrastructure. We probably on 15-minute increments. We're tracking how things are going, what's happening, what is the incoming volume, because realistically speaking, one drop call could be a person not living, and so we take this incredibly seriously. I'm gonna skip to the, okay, I'm gonna skip to the, no rush, there's a rush. Okay. So, because we have 215 crisis centers, people ask me, well, how does that actually work? What that is each crisis center is accredited, right? There's 2 accrediting bodies, and they have their own policies and procedures. But every single crisis center has to do follow-up. And what I mean by that is a crisis center generally speaking, has a relationship with their local mobile crisis team, right? And so they'll be on a call. I'm doing an old-fashioned call. Children now do this, by the way, to mimic a phone call because it's a cell phone. So you do your old-fashioned call to a mobile crisis team. They do referrals. Some crisis centers actually have embedded in them mobile crisis teams, and some don't. Other times, they might do a referral to 911 PSAP mapping. And so just for everybody to know, 988 cannot track people's locations. We cannot, we do not. If there is a case where someone needs to be found, that is actually done by a separate entity, 911, right? And so you all heard about geo-routing. Do you all know what it is? Great. So calls will be routed based on the nearest tower that they ping off of, but we cannot locate them. And so one of the things when you're on the Hill, privacy really matters to folks, and people are gonna ask, well, can you find the person? No. And in particular, this has implications when you have someone with intersectional identity, and we like people to know, can police show up at my door? Yep. 100% that can happen. Everybody should know that that's a possibility, and never downplay it when you're talking about it. But what if police show up at the door? Then police show up at the door. We are concerned with making sure that people live, and we also want them to make an informed decision about whether or not they want to use our service, given that that's our policy, and it will not change. 30 seconds, got it. We also do follow-up calls. Every single crisis center offers a follow-up call. Their policy may differ. So some crisis centers offer follow-up calls to 100% of people who reach out to them. Hey, at the end of the call, they'll say, each call is structured essentially the same way. And they'll say, hey, do you want us to call you back in 24 hours, right? They'll offer this. Most crisis centers don't do that for 100% of the calls. They'll do it for folks that are very high risk. They started out the call suicidal. Then at the end of the call, they're no longer suicidal, but the crisis counselor might think, you know what? This feels a little hinky to me. Can I offer you a call in 24 hours and 48 hours? And then also, we are obviously reporting abuse calls, things like that. And then we just launched a pilot, Caring Context. Have you guys ever heard of this thing called Caring Context? So this is actually an opting in for mostly for our familiar voices. Back in the day, they used to call folks who called or stopped in the ER frequent flyers, which is kind of a derogatory term. Within 988, we call them familiar voices. People call us every day, several times a day. What we're doing is actually starting to outreach to them, giving them an opportunity to engage with us for us to engage with them, because realistically speaking, familiar voices are really tough on crisis counselors. and they feel like they keep calling, it's always the same thing, they're not following up with referrals, and so we're trying to help decrease the emotional burden on our crisis centers. So, okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So I'm going to work this side of the room. And I am a native New Yorker, so I'm going to speak fast just to make sure I get through all my slides. So I'm Laura Herrera-Scott. I'm the Secretary of Health and help lead a super agency that's inclusive of the Behavioral Health Administration, but it's also inclusive of Medicaid. So we get to align on initiatives and work out payment issues as we're innovating in this space. So this is what we've been working on, what I will call as our behavioral health continuum of care. Governor Moore was sworn in last year, and I came shortly after that. And I'm a family medicine physician who spent most of her time doing HIV. I had 70% of my clients or patients were co-infected with IDU. So I managed behavioral health, especially depression and anxiety, but I wasn't an expert in it. And I didn't know the literature like I know somatic care. So really wanted to understand the state of the state in Maryland. And we pulled all claims for 21 and 22 to understand. I said, I want to know everything we're paying for, where we're paying for it, and who was served by it. And then we mapped it out by jurisdiction. And then I said, I want to see all our grants. And we get grants from SAMHSA, from CDC in this space. And we started to map it out, and we started to see where all the white space was, either at the county level or across demographic groups. So, for instance, we know people of color get less services regardless of age group and gender, as an example. But we mapped this out looking at prevention and promotion, primary behavioral health, urgent care and acute care, and treatment and recovery. And the color is, I was thinking at the time, like a thermometer. So red is hot based on the acuity. Pink is, upstream, the work that we can do there. We were spending a lot on acute treatment, so in the hospital, but not doing as much as we could be in the urgent crisis care. So many of you have seen this continuum before, someone to call, someone to respond, somewhere to go. And we didn't have this continuum over a year and plus ago. We started to have 988. We had some mobile crisis teams, but they weren't 24/7. We didn't technically have crisis stabilization centers that met the definition of crisis stabilization center. And we had some post-stabilization support. We didn't have much care coordination going back and forth in this continuum, so sometimes people would get stuck in one silo, not get the treatment that they needed, and then crashed into the emergency room in acute crisis. So for the last year plus, we've been building out this continuum in the urgent and acute care setting outside of the hospital. So this is what our Maryland 988 looks like. We have approximately 10,000 contacts with 988 in April in 2024. So like was just seen with all the data, we track a lot of data, call times, hang-ups, things like that, demographic data when it's shared. But as you can see, there's been a 119% increase in 988 since 2022, and we're also seeing an uptick in texts. It's a critical entry point into urgent and acute care. In these April numbers, 72% were able to be addressed, their problems were addressed by the call center, and then the remainder, 30% were referred to additional services. Our top referral resources in Maryland were community mental health and substance use disorder outpatient providers, community-based mobile crisis response and stabilization providers, EMS via 911, emergency departments for individuals with a medical emergency, 211 Maryland information and referral sources to community resources, homeless shelter, and other housing resources. Now, we are doing a lot to get people to engage with 988, but we still have other numbers like 211, 911, 311. So trying to manage those and get people directed to the right level of care is a work in progress. I want to call out the 4.3% of callers that had an active plan to commit suicide or complete suicide. 988 has been critical to addressing this population, and in about half the cases in last month or in April, 2% required emergency rescue, and this involved 911 and dispatch of EMS with a co-response for the mobile crisis team. And then about half were able to complete a safe contract plan, and then we followed up with intensive care services, including our mobile crisis teams. So we are closely monitoring the data and using it to inform our efforts at the department, including staffing, new scripts, new connections that maybe we hadn't thought of. Plus, we're seeing a pretty young cohort. I didn't mention it on the previous slide, but we're now getting a fair number of calls in 12 and under, and that number is ticking up. I don't know how many of you read a few months ago the 9-year-old that committed suicide in their school bathroom. So kids are really hurting as well. And so we're certainly trying to make sure that our call center activities are prepared to manage this younger group, as well as manage the families once they're managing the child. We have 24 counties in the state of Maryland, so the 988 team is working with all 24 jurisdictions. We're working with public safety and trying to coordinate our 988, 911 handoffs when we need to have those handoffs. We recently hosted a half-day conference that kicked off our efforts to promote 988 and 911 collaboration. And certainly the goals are, sharing of information and making sure those warm handoffs happen. And then we're working diligently to increase awareness of 988. With support from SAMHSA, we're also trying to do some research to really understand who's not using 988 and how can we increase 988. And then lastly, we hold our General Assembly from January through April, and we were very successful in getting a bill passed, and it was signed by the governor to establish a $3 annual fee on wireless phones to support the sustainability of 988. So we're currently in the process of identifying the strategies for those funds. That bill kicks in July 1, but now we'll have another sustainable funding source for our 988 line in the state. I would be happy to share the legislation for those of you that are interested in introducing something like that in your state. We've also been successful with ads. The Ravens have been incredible partners, and certainly we had multiple public service announcements, and we are doing more and more as we identify other cohorts of people that may or may not identify with football, but trying to think about how to get the word out. Can I see if this works? Oh, there is no way for it. I was going to see if you could pull up the video, but it's just seconds. That's okay. So now they call, and we have to deploy our mobile crisis teams. And as I mentioned, 2/3 are able to be helped by the call center, but the remaining third need additional supports. We only had about 24 crisis teams in the state of Maryland. They did not operate 24/7. They did not serve children and their families. And like I said, our crisis stabilization centers weren't by definition, crisis stabilization centers. So we've been doing a lot to build the capacity of the teams and set the floor for expectations for the mobile crisis teams. In fiscal year 2024, so year to date, 17,000 people were served by the mobile crisis teams, and we are looking to increase the number of people helped through that service. They provide in-person support to people when they experience an urgent mental health issue and/or substance use. I will also say, I think some of you are aware of our gun violence in the state. They're also the ones going into communities, stabilizing the communities post-shooting, and then helping to stabilize the community. We are moving towards 24/7, and then teams conduct follow-up a few weeks after to ensure people are connected to the services they were referred to. Again, as I mentioned, not all our crisis teams have been serving children and their families, so we've been providing training to providers on the evidence-based mobile response and stabilization service model, which is really designed to support youth and families that are experiencing urgent and acute behavioral health challenges. So more work on that to come. I'm going to go quick then. Crisis stabilization centers, we now have 6. We actually, like I said, because Medicaid is part of the administration, for the first time, we worked with Behavioral Health Administration and Medicaid to define regulations. And for the first time, we will leverage federal Medicaid funding to support the sustainability of the service. So it was state general funds, but now we're able to draw down the federal match because of the co-design of the program. Here's what it looks like. We invested another $13.5 million for 19 jurisdictions. Again, we've expanded mobile crisis teams. We now have 35 teams, 6 jurisdictions. We have another RFP going out to increase capacity. Lastly, care traffic control and bed registry. So we want to understand, even for the crisis teams and the crisis stabilization centers, since only so many days they can stay there, where are the empty beds in the state? And in 11/21, we passed a bill that said we had to develop a registry. It was very manual based. We were using 211, and now we are working on a major IT development project, so we know every single behavioral health bed and every hospital bed that has a psychiatric unit on what is open so that people can connect people to services. It's a searchable inventory of public and private providers, mental health and substance use disorder providers across outpatient, urgent, and emergent care. It will be able to accept 988 crisis calls and dispatch support, connect with the mobile crisis teams, and lastly, we have a statewide health information exchange where we get real-time admission, discharge, transfer data. This will be part of that system, so you can see all the beds and we can direct. The other feature that we're working on, and I see I'm done, so I'm going to end really quickly, it's going to have like an Uber app feature, so we can deploy the closest mobile crisis teams. I don't know how many of you live out of state. I like I said, from New York, so I still have a New York area code. So if you ping, it may not ping locally, and then connecting me to the services doesn't necessarily work. So more to come on that space based on this major IT development project. So next steps, like I said, we're going to continue to increase awareness, collaborate with 911, continue to build out our mobile crisis teams and make sure they're able to support children and their families, and then working on this care traffic control bed registry referral system. So a lot of work to do, and thank you, for all of you, for what you do, because these kind of things don't happen without boots on the ground and people actually doing the work. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I just want to start by giving another round of applause for Dr. Dole and Secretary Herrera-Scott, as well as a huge round of applause for our Maryland chapter specifically. As the Secretary noted, there was a fantastic win that's going to pay off for years to come. So, as everybody here knows, my name is Bill White. I'm Senior Manager of Federal Policy, and I want to bring us back to the CONNECT Act, HR 6928. Everything you were just hearing ties into this. What the CONNECT Act does is very simple. It provides additional, or it authorizes, I should say, additional funding for crisis centers to provide follow-up services. But follow-up services take many forms, and every aspect of the 988 system plays into this. So this is a bipartisan bill in the House of Representatives, led by Representative Trone, Representative Raskin, and Representative Brian Fitzpatrick. I'm going to be jumping into what the bill specifically does, but I also just want to speak briefly to follow-up services and my own personal story. So just over a decade ago, I called the Lifeline. This is well before the transition to 988, of course. And after speaking with the person on the line for about 15 to 20 minutes, they asked if they could have my email address. And then they followed up the next day with local peer support services, a local peer support group, which was tremendously helpful. Then they followed up the next week. Then they followed up the next month. Not every call center does that, not every crisis center does that in that form, but every crisis center across the country does something like that. Every crisis center in the 988 system provides follow-up services. And for millions of individuals across the country, that can be life-saving. It's tremendously beneficial. And we know that responders at crisis centers want to provide follow-up services. We know how helpful they are. And so going back to the bill, what this does is it authorizes $30 million in federal funding to help crisis centers provide those follow-up services. Those funds would be distributed through SAMHSA, through a competitive grant program. What that means is that 988 crisis centers across the country would be able to apply for funding through this grant program. And I just want to note very briefly, this would authorize funding, not directly appropriate it. So as you all probably know, before funding is appropriated federally, it needs to be authorized. A lot of bills will authorize funding. What it means is the federal government is able to spend that money at a later point on that priority. Doesn't necessarily mean that amount of funding would be appropriated for it. So moving forward, what specifically would this look like? Recipients of grant funding through this program would be able to use that funding to help provide check-ins with 988 callers after a crisis. That could be by email, it could be by phone, it could be in person. Obviously that would be at the request of the caller. It could be to facilitate engagement with services and supports, like peer support groups, but also like inpatient mental health treatment, helping an individual to find a primary care provider or a counselor or other services. It could take the form of collaborating with family and caregivers and natural social supports, individuals in a caller's circle of trust. Follow-up services can take the form of providing referrals to 988 callers to providers based on their needed level of care. Follow-up services save lives. We know that individuals following a crisis are at a heightened risk of suicide. For example, we know that individuals following inpatient mental health treatment are at over 100 times risk of suicide, according to one study. And so we know that individuals who are calling 988 are likely at a heightened risk of suicide. And so we know that these individuals need our support. We know that follow-up services work, and that's why this is so important. When responders at a crisis center follow up with an individual and provide follow-up services, they help that individual know that they are cared for. They help them know that their life matters. And perhaps most importantly, they help them know that help is available. Follow-up services usually take place 24 to 48 hours following a crisis, but they can take place weeks and months later. It's not unusual for follow-up services to be on a recurring basis to help individuals engage in mental health services. That's especially important because we know that individuals who have depression or who have recently had a suicidal crisis may face difficulty remaining engaged in mental health supports. As all of us know, it is difficult in the best of circumstances to receive mental health treatment, and following a crisis, it's especially acute. And so having an individual following up with someone who has recently had a crisis can help that individual remain engaged, can help ensure that they receive needed support, and can ultimately help save their life. I touched on this earlier, but I just wanted to speak briefly to the heightened risk that individuals face following inpatient treatment, following a visit to an emergency department, and the implications that has for callers to 988. I'm raising this because it's difficult to have data on the heightened suicide risk individuals might face following a crisis or a call to 988, but similar touch points like visits to emergency departments, like inpatient mental health treatment, provide an image of the heightened risk an individual may have after a call to 988. And we know that individuals, again, who receive those follow-up services are at a greatly reduced risk of suicide. I touched on this briefly earlier, but as many as 70% of suicide attempt survivors don't engage or remain in mental health treatment following a crisis. Receiving follow-up services helps individuals seek that treatment in the first place and then remain engaged with it once they are engaged in treatment. So, I just want to touch on anchors of hope here. In a recent survey, 80% of respondents said that follow-up services after a call to 988 helped save their life. I think that's the single most compelling statistic about the effectiveness of follow-up services for individuals who call 988. Again, as I touched on earlier, follow-up care improves engagement with mental health support, it reduces the risk of suicide, and it helps individuals know that help is available. So just coming towards the conclusion here, crisis centers are capable of this work, but they need additional funding. This bill would help crisis centers provide this important work and help provide follow-up services. And so In conclusion, our ask for members of Congress would be to ask them to consider co-sponsoring and supporting H.R. 6928, the CONNECT Act, to establish a federal grant program to provide follow-up services, and to consider leading a Senate version of this bill. There is not currently a Senate version of this bill in Congress, and so in your Senate meetings, we encourage you to ask your senators to consider co-sponsoring this. We need a Senate lead for this bill that would greatly improve its chances of passing this Congress. And finally, our key talking points. I know this is redundant, but I just want to drive the point home. After a crisis, follow-up services help prevent suicide. Again, I would really lean on that statistic in your meetings that 80% of polled 988 Lifeline callers reported that follow-up services helped save their life. And the CONNECT Act will help fund this important work, authorizing federal funding to help crisis services provide follow-up services. And again, the authorization amount for the bill is $30 million. So with that, we'll move to Q&A. Oh, and just touching briefly on this, you likely already know, but in order to submit questions, please scan the QR code at your table. I saw a couple folks raising hands, so just wanted to mention that. And let's go to our first question.
Great, thank you. The first question is there a way to see how many call centers or contact centers our state has and where they are located?
That's me. Yeah. Is this on? Yeah. Yeah, you can, I believe that you can just look on our website and see the list of all the call centers that are listed there. 988lifeline.org.
Is it? Is this on? Oh, cool. Yeah, it is. To what extent is 988 referred to by 211 as a resource?
You know, we don't have actually the numbers from 211. So they, you know, they are run by primarily United Way. And so, you know, I actually wouldn't know offhand, unfortunately.
I can just
You
say,
may know?
I don't know the number, but there's no warm handoff right now. So that's something that we're working on. We have working on the handoff between 988 and 911, but that handoff doesn't exist for 211 right now.
Well, and I think what's interesting actually about the handoff from 988 to 911 works, generally speaking. 911 to 988 is an interesting question, primarily because if you as a dispatcher are answering calls for 911, someone calls in with an emergency, you're very hesitant to say, oh, this is a mental health crisis, let me refer to 988, because they're afraid that they're not doing the right thing and that the person might be injured in some way. So it almost becomes like a liability issue, which is they would love to send them to us, but there's also a fear that they're not going to be able to make the right decision and that they should have just sent emergency services to the individual.
Thank you for that answer. That's really helpful. Can you repeat the statistic for how many people felt the follow-up contact saved their lives? I think maybe that was Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to be redundant here, but 80% of 80% of 988 callers who were polled reported that follow-up services helped to save their life and prevent suicide.
Perfect. Thank you.
And next up, will the CONNECT Act address marginalized communities, especially those who may live in poverty and don't have clear access to mental health care? And will this make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say there is that follow-up services can be remarkably helpful for individuals who historically have not had easy access to mental health services. Having a trained professional who responds to the call and is trained to look at a directory of local mental health resources, help an individual know how to navigate the Medicaid system or their state Medicaid program, or otherwise engage in existing supports that the individual may have available to them but may not know about, is especially helpful specifically for historically marginalized communities. But
I might have a difference.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry. I think it actually depends on what it is, right? So it depends on what is in the follow-up. If the follow-up is, hey, are you okay? Great. If the follow-up is, hey, where do you live? Who are you? What is your identity? How can I be helpful here? Okay, this is how you navigate. It really depends on how much basically the crisis centers get and how many resources they can put it against it. I think that the other part about follow-up is that, we hear a lot from folks who live in rural communities where a follow-up is a 2-hour car ride to any type of crisis service. And so realistically speaking, connecting people to services it's literally limited by geography, and they just tend to call us back again. And so this is where actually telehealth comes in a huge play for helping those individuals.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how should we prepare for increases in both the 988 volume and the utilization jump in stabilization centers, given that the 9.5 million contact volume, that statistic, with less than 1.4 Americans using the service, and the need for more visibility of 988. So basically, with the rising awareness of 988, we intend that that's going to continue. How should we prepare for increases in call volume and the demand on stabilization centers?
I mean, the call centers themselves are poised to be able to take on more capacity. It really is a funding issue from my perspective. So, our fiscal year 25 budget is an X amount, right? Which means that we can, most of the money that comes to 988, what most folks don't realize, that goes directly to call centers. We're essentially a pass-through entity, and most of the money is like a subawardee to about 50 to 60 call centers. So if there were to be an increase in volume that surpassed the ability for the federal government to pay, that would actually be the limiting factor. I think, the ability to answer calls is there. Most of the crisis centers want more business. And so I think the other limiting factor is really about making sure that we have enough crisis counselors. And one of the biggest limiting factors is if the state requires the crisis counselor to be a master's level person, that actually really limits the pool, and then they're not really paid enough to do that type of work. So why would they when they can go in private practice or whatever and make a lot more money? And so, if you were gonna think about, well, I don't think you need a college degree to be a crisis counselor. I think the best crisis counselors are just regular people who may have had the experience themselves or may not, who are just really passionate about the work and actually can set emotional boundaries for themselves, side note. So there are a lot of factors that I think, kind of play in, but I can say that the system itself is prepared for an increase in volume. It really is just a couple of those types of factors.
And just speaking from the Maryland, that's why we passed legislation, because we are looking at speed to answer, the length of calls, the kinds of extra education that we need for the call center staff, especially with the younger cohort and other demographics aging Maryland. So that's why we passed the legislation. So we would have that flexibility, but that's part of the data that we track in addition to who we're serving. What are the needs of the call center and the call center staff? So to make sure that they have what they need to serve Maryland residents that call into the line.
Well, and that's such a great point. Prior to the launch of 988, right at the beginning, the average answer rate was 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Now it's 38 seconds, and it's been an exponential increase. And so the system can manage an increase in volume 100%.
Okay, thank you. So one other question we have is, given the privacy concerns, how are we tracking folks to follow up with? How are we gathering that information without violating or not allowing that transparency and that confidentiality for those people who are calling?
So they have to opt in. Okay. They don't get followed against their will. And it's important for folks to know when they reach out, they don't have to share their information. And really the best way to hide who you are is to use our chat service. Because if you use a cell phone, right, people can track you. I don't know if I should tell people how to avoid, but if you really, it's actually important for folks to know. So you have to opt in. You're not gonna get a call against your will.
We have lots of great questions. It's not a matter of them not coming in, it's which one do we go to next? Thank you all for submitting so many of them. Well, I have sort of a question related to the bill in particular. Is the $30 million within the bill itself authorized a one-time need, or will there be a need for another future ask for funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it would be authorized for the next 3 fiscal years. The reality politically is when a bill like this passes, usually this sort of program is renewed. It's very difficult to cancel a program once it's been created, and defunding it or reducing the funding level for an existing program would be deeply unpopular. We're lucky that this is an issue that is relatively nonpartisan. We see strong support from both sides of the aisle in Washington, and I can tell you from experience there are very few issues where that's true. So, to that question, once established, even though this would only authorize funding for the next 3 fiscal years, we imagine it would be authorized for a much longer period than that. This would be a long-standing victory.
And one other question, does the follow-up funding go towards services for people who need counseling, therapy, or things that would be referred to, things that could be referred to in the community?
So no, the funding would not go directly to that care. It would be going to connecting an individual to that care. So that could take the form of just providing information to a caller to 988. As Dr. Dole noted, it could take the form of providing a ride for an individual to a provider appointment. But it would not be for, say, counseling itself. It would be limited to the connecting services, helping individuals find care, receive care, and then remain engaged in that care.
Great, thanks, Bill. Next question. I'm glad we're seeing an increase of people utilizing 988. However, nationwide, there seems to be a shortage of resources, like therapists, psychiatrists, etc. What can we do as advocates to also make strides in regards to meeting those needs? I'm fearful the infrastructure of services currently can't meet the climate of the demands.
So I'll start. We don't have enough people graduating from the different schools that we have, whether that's, psychiatric residencies, nurse practitioners or psychiatric nurses or social workers. I actually was speaking to the dean at University of Maryland School of Social Worker, and she said enrollment was really down, and whether that's the cost of the tuition or something else. And so we're working with a consultant right now actually looking at our behavioral health workforce, because not only do we not have adequate workforce for certain populations such as kids or aging Maryland, but where they're distributed in the state is really sporadic. So in the Eastern Shore in Western Maryland, to your point, you're driving long distances to access services. So that's something that we're looking at very closely. In addition, exactly what you said, do you need all these degrees to provide the services, and would lived experience in a peer support model be equally as important in helping to engage someone in their own care? So all of these things are on the table, working with our respective schools and formal education, working with other models for peer supports, a lot of it in the opioid space, not as much in the mental health space. I, again, shared that I was prior military. There was a lot of group mental health in the military, so people could have shared experience and what worked. So is that an option? So we're exploring everything at this time. We had a significant workforce pre-COVID, and unfortunately, the workforce just did not bounce back post-COVID the way we thought. And for the providers we do have, they are on the older age, closer to retirement than not. So we are working on an active plan in the state of Maryland to figure out where is the workforce going to come from, and make sure we have adequate providers that are culturally diverse and linguistically appropriate. So that's the other thing. We need to diversify our workforce for sure.
I want to add all that, and there's actually a launch of the Youth Mental Health Corps I don't know if folks have heard of it, which is like launching young people to be deployed in high schools across the country to provide some mental health. It literally launched like 3 weeks ago. So I think that each state is kind of addressing their individual deficit in mental health care, but coming back to non-traditional healing spaces like faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, and I work with young people all the time. When you have one school counselor in every school of hundreds and hundreds of kids, there's no chance that that person is going to be able to help enough young people. So reinvesting in our school infrastructure, I think, is going to be really key.
And I just want to jump in briefly. The Minority Fellowship Program at the federal level is a fantastic program that currently helps provide scholarship opportunities and otherwise just broaden the pipeline of mental health workers of diverse backgrounds, helping to ensure that the population of mental health workers matches the population of the United States, and that all individuals have access to culturally competent mental health care.
Okay, maybe one last question?
Sure. We had a couple questions coming in about data and how to access data and what data is available. So for either one of you, the data that Vibrant provides or state level data, what can our advocates kind of look toward as a source, and especially in light of them going to the Hill tomorrow, what might be helpful in that context as well?
So that's actually a good question. So I get the data. I'm not even sure if we put it out. So now I'm going to have to go back and do that as a takeaway. For the Maryland team, do you get to see the data?
Yes.
No. So I am really transparent, and for the last year plus I've been putting out a lot of data and breaking it down by demographic when I have it. I see no reason why we can't put that data out, especially since it's all de-identified and aggregated. So that's a take home for me. I don't think we're doing it in Maryland. I see it, but I don't know that it's publicly available for everyone else to see it.
So 988 data is available on the SAMHSA website.
Can you sort by state?
Yeah, absolutely. But I will say two things. Number one, it's interesting because the type of data that people want about the 988 context is not necessarily appropriate for us to ask. So if someone is calling and they're in a suicidal crisis, we're not going to ask them, what is your ethnicity? And so in a lot of ways, the data that we have about callers, tech chatter, is spotty because it's inappropriate to ask demographic questions unless they're willing to fill out a post-call survey. I can say that Vibrant actually in the next few months, we're going to launch like a data visualization tool that is going to show like data, be able to sort by state, sort by presenting issue, sort by mobile crisis team, so that everybody in the country can have access. De-identified completely. And we don't want people to be able to drill down too deep, in part because different states have different laws that are sort of targeting specific communities. And so it's a delicate balance of sharing data and also understanding that some folks might be at risk if you can see that there are two trans kids in this specific state and it could put them at risk.
Thank you so much. I am really proud to live in the state of Maryland, not only because past sustainable 988 telecom, but also thank you so much, Dr. Scott, for leading the Department of Health as the Secretary, and Dr. Tia Dole for your work at Vibrant. Please join me in thanking them for this